A billionaire CEO returns home to find a stranger teaching her silent son and realizes the man she hired to clean her floors might be the only person who can save them both. But when she uncovers his buried genius, she sets off a war with an enemy who's already destroyed him once and won't stop until he destroys her too. If you're ready for a story about power, truth, and two broken families fighting their way back, stay with me until the end. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this one travels. The mansion was silent. Adrienne Vale had been counting on that. She'd built her entire life around control, over boardrooms, over markets, over the pristine glass and steel fortress she called home. Silence was order. Silence was power. Silence meant everything was exactly where it should be. But tonight, something was wrong. She stood in the marble foyer, designer heels clicking against polished stone, her Burberry coat still damp from the Seattle rain. The house should have been empty. Mason was supposed to be asleep. The housekeeper, what was his name again? Caleb something, should have left hours ago. Instead, she heard laughter. Adrienne froze. Not polite laughter. Not restrained or careful. Real laughter, the kind that erupted without permission, messy and uncontrolled and completely, utterly impossible. Because Mason didn't laugh. Her son hadn't laughed in 2 years. Not since the accident that killed his father. Not through therapy sessions or expensive specialists or the parade of nannies who'd tried and failed and quietly resigned. Mason barely spoke. He certainly didn't laugh. But someone was laughing upstairs. Adrienne dropped her briefcase and moved toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs in a way that had nothing to do with the 18-hour workday she'd just survived. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, following the noise to the last place she wanted to go, James's study. The door was cracked open. Warm light spilled into the hallway. She stopped just outside, her hand pressed against the doorframe, and looked inside. Mason sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, surrounded by scattered papers and colored pencils. His dark hair fell into his eyes. His small hands moved frantically across a sheet of paper, sketching something Adrienne couldn't see from this angle. And kneeling beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, was Caleb Hart, the housekeeper she'd hired 3 months ago and barely noticed since. "Okay, now watch this," Caleb was saying, his voice low and steady. He picked up a red pencil and drew a simple shape, a triangle. "See how it's pointing up? That means it's pushing, like you're pushing a swing." Mason's eyes went wide. "So if it points down, it's pulling, exactly. Like gravity, just like gravity." Caleb grinned, and the expression transformed his entire face. He was younger than Adrienne had realized, maybe 35, with dark stubble and tired eyes that suddenly looked less tired. "You just invented a whole visual language for forces. You know what that means?" "What?" "You're smarter than half the engineers I used to work with." Mason giggled, actually giggled, and bent over his paper again, pencil flying. "Can we do velocity next? I want to see what it looks like when something's going really, really fast." "We can do whatever you want, buddy." Adrienne felt something crack open inside her chest. She'd spent 2 years watching her son disappear. 2 years of specialists telling her he was developmentally delayed, that he was processing trauma, that she needed to lower her expectations. She'd believed them. She'd stopped trying to reach him because every attempt felt like pressing against a wall that would never move. But here he was, alive, excited, laughing. And here was this man, this stranger she'd barely spoken to, doing something she'd thought was impossible. She must have made a sound because Caleb's head snapped up. His eyes met hers, and she saw the exact moment he realized who she was. The warmth drained from his expression. His shoulders went rigid. "Ms. Vale." He stood quickly, brushing off his jeans. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were... I should have left hours ago. I was just... What are you doing?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Mason's smile vanished. He pulled his knees to his chest, suddenly small again. Caleb glanced at the boy, then back at Adrienne. Something flickered across his face. Frustration maybe, or disappointment, before he smoothed it away. "I was helping him with his homework. I'm sorry if I overstepped." "His homework?" Adrienne stepped into the room, her gaze sweeping across the scattered papers. They weren't homework. They were diagrams, complex, color-coded sketches, that looked nothing like the basic worksheets Mason's teacher sent home. This isn't his homework. No, Caleb admitted. His homework was too easy. He finished it in 10 minutes. Too easy. Yes. Adrienne felt anger rising in her throat, sharp and defensive. My son's teacher said he's struggling. She said he needs extra support, not... She gestured at the papers. Whatever this is. With respect, Ms. Vale, his teacher is wrong. The words hung in the air between them. Nobody contradicted Adrienne Vale. Not her executive team, not her board, certainly not the man she paid to clean her toilets. But Caleb didn't look away. He met her stare with something that looked almost like pity. Mason isn't struggling, he said quietly. He's bored. There's a difference. You've known him for 3 months. I've worked with hundreds of kids like him. Like him? Gifted, asynchronous learners, kids whose brains work faster than the system they're stuck in. Caleb's voice was calm, almost clinical. Mason doesn't have a learning disability. He has a teaching problem. Adrienne felt her jaw tighten. You're a housekeeper. I am now. What's that supposed to mean? Caleb looked at Mason again. The boy was watching them both, his small face anxious. Something passed between them, some silent understanding Adrienne wasn't part of, and Caleb's expression softened. It means I used to do something else, he said. Before. Before what? Before I needed a job that didn't ask questions. The answer was so blunt it stopped her. Adrienne studied him more carefully. The worn flannel shirt, the calloused hands, the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. He looked like someone who'd been running for a long time. Mom? Mason's voice was small. Are you mad? She turned to her son, and the fear in his face gutted her. When had he started looking at her like that? When had she become someone he was afraid of? No, baby, she said, forcing her voice to soften. I'm not mad. I'm just surprised. Caleb's really smart, Mason said earnestly. He knows everything about physics and math, and he makes it make sense. Not like school. School's boring. I know, sweetheart. Can he keep teaching me, please? Adrienne looked at Caleb. He was watching Mason with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something protective and sad and fiercely gentle all at once. We'll talk about it, she said finally. But right now it's way past your bedtime. Mason's face fell. But we were just getting to the good part. Tomorrow, Caleb cut in gently. I promise. We'll pick up right where we left off. You promise? I promise. Mason hesitated, then nodded. He gathered his papers carefully as if they were precious, and stood. When he passed Adrienne on his way to the door, he paused. I'm sorry I was up late, he whispered. It's okay. She touched his hair just briefly. Go brush your teeth. He disappeared into the hallway, and then it was just the two of them. Adrienne waited until she heard Mason's bedroom door close. Then she turned to Caleb. Explain, she said. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then he walked to James's desk and picked up one of Mason's drawings. Your son, he said, is what we call a visual spatial learner. He thinks in pictures, not words. Traditional teaching methods don't work for him because they're built for auditory sequential processors, kids who learn step by step in order through listening and repetition. Mason's brain doesn't work that way. He needs to see the whole system first. Once he does, he can manipulate it in ways most kids can't. Adrienne stared at him. How do you know all this? Because I built a career studying it. A career is what? Caleb set the drawing down. I was a researcher, cognitive development, learning theory, educational neuroscience. I spent 8 years developing a methodology for teaching kids like Mason, kids the system labels as slow or difficult when really they're just wired differently. Where? University of Oregon. I ran a lab, published papers, worked with schools across the Pacific Northwest. His voice was flat, factual. Then someone stole my research, and I lost everything. The words landed like stones. Adrienne felt her analytical mind kick into gear, the same instinct that made her a killer in boardrooms. She started cataloging details, his age, his education level, the careful way he avoided specifics. Who stole it? She asked. Does it matter? If you're teaching my son, yes, it matters. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, but there was no humor in it. Victor Lang, he said. He was my department chair, my mentor. I trusted him with everything, my notes, my data, my methodologies. And when I got too close to something that could actually change how we teach vulnerable kids, he took it, published it under his name, had me blacklisted when I tried to fight back. Why didn't you sue? I did. I lost. He had institutional power, money, lawyers who could bury me in paperwork until I couldn't afford to eat, so I took what mattered most and I left. What mattered most? My son. The answer shifted something in Adrienne's understanding. She thought about Mason's drawings, about the careful way Caleb had knelt beside him, about the promise he'd made. How old is your son? She asked quietly. 9. His name's Noah. Where is he now? With a sitter. I work nights so I can be with him during the day. Does he... Adrienne hesitated. Is he like Mason? Worse. Caleb's expression hardened. Noah has ADHD and dyslexia. The school system broke him before he turned 7. Teachers told me he'd never read at grade level, never focused long enough to learn anything complex. They wanted to drug him into compliance. But you didn't let them. No. I taught him myself. Used the methods I'd developed. Within 6 months, he was reading 3 grades ahead. Within a year, he was teaching himself calculus using visual models. Adrienne felt something cold settle in her stomach. So why are you cleaning houses? Because Victor Lang made sure I'd never work in education again. He spread rumors, contacted every university I applied to, made me untouchable. I couldn't even get hired as a teaching assistant. Caleb's voice was still calm, but she could hear the rage underneath. So I do this. I stay invisible. I keep my head down, and I make sure my son never has to be invisible too. The room fell silent. Adrienne walked to the window and looked out at the city lights glittering below. She'd built her empire on seeing what others missed, on recognizing value where no one else did. And she was looking at something valuable right now. She just didn't know if she could afford the price. I want to hire you, she said finally. You already hired me. Not as a housekeeper, as Mason's tutor. Caleb shook his head. I can't. Why not? Because the moment I surface, Lang will find out. He's still at Oregon, still powerful, still watching. So? So he'll destroy me again. And this time, he'll go after my son. Adrienne turned to face him. What if I made sure he couldn't? Caleb let out a short, bitter laugh. You're a CEO, not a miracle worker. I'm a CEO with resources you can't imagine. She crossed her arms. And I want my son to be whoever he's supposed to be. If that means going to war with some academic asshole, fine. I've won uglier fights. You don't know what you're asking for. Then educate me. He stared at her, and she could see him weighing it, the risk, the cost, the possibility that she might actually mean what she said. Victor Lang isn't just some academic, he said slowly. He's a celebrity in education circles, guest lectures, best-selling books, TED Talks about reimagining learning for the 21st century. The methodology he stole from me made him famous. If you go after him, he'll come after you. Your company, your reputation, your family, nothing will be off limits. I didn't get where I am by being afraid of bullies. This isn't about fear. It's about protecting what matters most. Caleb's voice dropped. I've already lost my career. I can't lose my son. You won't. You can't promise that. Watch me. They locked eyes, and Adrienne saw the exact moment his resistance cracked. Not because he believed her, but because he was desperate enough to want to. If I do this, he said quietly, if I agree to teach Mason, I need something from you first. Name it. Help me prove what Lang did, not just for me, for every kid who's been crushed by a system that tells them they're broken when they're just different. Adrienne felt a smile tug at her lips, the kind of smile that made her competitors nervous. Done, she said. Caleb blinked. Just like that? Just like that? You don't even know what you're agreeing to. I know enough. She walked toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Meet me in my office. Bring everything you have, research notes, correspondence, anything that proves Lang stole your work. We're going to war, Mr. Hart, and I don't lose. She left before he could argue, but as she climbed the stairs to her own bedroom, her mind was already racing. Victor Lang, University of Oregon, 8 years of research, stolen and rebranded. She pulled out her phone and typed a name into her private investigator's encrypted chat. Need a full workup. Academic fraud case. Target, Victor Lang. Everything. Publications, funding sources, professional history, personal life. I want to know what he ate for breakfast in 2015. The response came back in seconds. Timeline? Yesterday. Adrienne smiled grimly and set the phone down. Then she walked to Mason's room and cracked open the door. Her son was already asleep, curled around the drawings he'd made with Caleb. His face was peaceful in a way she hadn't seen in 2 years, and for the first time since James died, Adrienne felt something that might have been hope. The next morning, Caleb showed up at exactly 9 o'clock. Adrienne's corner office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Vale Tower, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Caleb looked wrong there, rumpled and out of place in his faded jeans and flannel. But he didn't look intimidated. He set a worn backpack on her glass desk and pulled out a laptop so old it had actual physical damage. Cracked screen, missing keys, held together with duct tape. "This is everything," he said. 5 years of research, developmental models, teaching frameworks, case studies with over 200 kids, all backed up and encrypted because I knew Lang would try to erase it. Adrienne opened the laptop. The files were meticulously organized, color-coded folders, detailed notes, video documentation of children learning through Caleb's methods. "Walk me through it," she said. For the next 3 hours, Caleb did exactly that. He showed her brain scans proving that visual spatial learners processed information through different neural pathways. He showed her longitudinal studies demonstrating that his teaching methods produced better outcomes than traditional approaches. He showed her emails from parents whose children had been labeled unteachable until Caleb worked with them. And he showed her the original drafts of papers that Victor Lang had later published under his own name, sometimes with only minor rewording. "This one," Caleb said, pulling up a document dated 6 years earlier, "was my breakthrough. I'd figured out how to create visual models for abstract mathematical concepts, algebra, calculus, even quantum mechanics. I shared the draft with Lang because he was supposed to be helping me get it published. And 3 months later, he presented it at an international conference under his name, without crediting me." Adrienne leaned back in her chair. "Did you confront him?" "Immediately. He said I'd misunderstood our collaboration, that the ideas had come from our joint discussions, that I was just a research assistant, that I should be grateful he was willing to include me as a secondary author on future work." "But you weren't just a research assistant." "No. I was a postdoctoral fellow. I had my own lab, my own funding. We were colleagues." Caleb's voice went flat. "At least, I thought we were." "What happened when you pushed back?" "He went to the university administration, said I was mentally unstable, that I'd been falsifying data and making wild accusations. He had friends in high places, provost, dean, the whole academic old boys club. By the time I realized what was happening, I was under investigation for research misconduct." Adrienne felt her anger sharpening into something cold and precise. "And you couldn't fight it." "I tried, but I was a nobody going up against a tenured professor with institutional power and a best-selling book. The investigation dragged on for 18 months. I ran out of money, ran out of options." He closed the laptop. "So I took Noah and I left. Started over somewhere Lang would never think to look. Cleaning houses. Better than losing my son." Adrienne stood and walked to the window. Below, the city sprawled in every direction. Glass towers and concrete valleys, a landscape built by people who knew how to fight. She'd spent her entire career navigating power structures. Corporate boards, venture capital firms, regulatory agencies. She knew how to find leverage and exploit it. Academic institutions were just another system, and every system had weaknesses. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. "First, I'm putting you on salary as Mason's private tutor. $50,000 a month, full benefits, housing stipend." Caleb choked. 50. Are you insane? "That's a lowball offer for what you're worth, but we'll renegotiate after we destroy Lang." She turned to face him. "Second, I'm hiring a legal team, not university lawyers, people who specialize in intellectual property theft and academic fraud. They'll build an airtight case. Lang already won that fight because you were broke and alone. You're not anymore. Adrian's smile was sharp. Third, I'm going to make some calls. I know people who sit on university boards, who control grant funding, who decide which academics get invited to which conferences. By the time I'm done, Victor Lang's name will be radioactive. Caleb was staring at her like she'd just offered to move a mountain. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. Because my son laughed last night for the first time in 2 years. Because you're the only person who's been able to reach him. Because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because I spent 18 months watching specialists tell me my child was broken, and it turns out the only thing broken was the system trying to teach him. That's not enough reason to risk your reputation. It's every reason. Adrienne walked back to her desk and pulled up a file on her computer. Victor Lang published his last major paper 6 months ago, Revolutionary Approaches to Neurodivergent Education. It's been cited 300 times. He's got a book deal based on it. I know. I read it. Caleb's jaw tightened. 80% of that paper is my work. Prove it. I can't. Not without... He stopped. Wait. Do you still have access to the university's internal systems? No. But I know someone who does. Adrienne pulled out her phone and dialed. The call connected on the second ring. Senator Hayes, she said smoothly. It's Adrienne Vale. I need a favor. Over the next hour, Adrienne made 6 more calls. A federal investigator who owed her for campaign contributions, a forensic data analyst who specialized in academic plagiarism, a journalist from the New York Times who'd been trying to interview her for 3 years. By the time she hung up, Caleb was gripping the edge of her desk so hard his knuckles had gone white. You're actually doing this, he said. I told you I don't lose. You don't understand. Lang isn't going to take this quietly. The moment he finds out you're investigating him, he'll what? Threaten me? Adrienne's eyes glinted. I've had death threats from people a lot scarier than some academic fraud. Let him try. It's not you I'm worried about. The words hung in the air. Adrienne thought about Mason, about the way his small face had looked when he asked if she was mad, about how easy it would be for someone with power to hurt a child. We'll protect them, she said firmly. Both of them. I'll hire security, keep them out of the public eye, make sure... You can't guarantee that. No, but I can make damn sure anyone who tries to hurt our kids regrets it for the rest of their life. Our kids. She'd said it without thinking, and now the words sat between them, strange and too intimate. Caleb looked away. I need to think about this. Fine. You have until tomorrow. That's not enough time. It's all the time we have, because if we're doing this, we need to move fast. Before Lang realizes we're coming. Adrienne's voice softened, just slightly. I know you're scared, but hiding didn't save you last time. Maybe fighting will. Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them again, she saw something different there. Not hope, exactly, but the ghost of it. Okay, he said. Okay, let's do it. Adrienne smiled. And outside, 42 floors below, the city hummed with the kind of chaos that made empires rise and fall. Neither of them knew it yet, but the war had already begun. The first warning came 3 days later. Adrienne was in a budget meeting when her assistant interrupted, her face pale and her hands shaking slightly as she passed over a manila envelope. This just arrived by courier, she said quietly. No return address. Adrienne opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words printed in block letters. Stop or else. She stared at it for a long moment, then set it down and returned to the meeting as if nothing had happened. But her mind was already racing, cataloging possibilities, calculating risks. Someone knew what they were doing. Someone was watching. After the meeting, she called her head of security and showed him the note. I want to know who sent this, she said, and I want cameras installed at my house, Caleb's apartment, and the school. Full surveillance. You think this is serious? I think someone just threatened me in writing. So yes, I think it's serious. The cameras went up that afternoon. By evening, Adrienne's investigative team had traced the courier service to a prepaid account registered under a fake name. Dead end. Whoever sent the note knew how to cover their tracks. She didn't tell Caleb about the threat. Not yet. He was already nervous enough about the lawsuit her legal team was preparing, about going public with accusations that could end his anonymity forever. Adding paranoia to the mix wouldn't help anyone, but she doubled Mason's security detail and started varying her routes home. The second warning came a week later, and it was worse. Adrienne was dropping Mason off at school when she noticed something wrong. The usual cluster of parents at drop-off had gone silent, staring at her with expressions that ranged from hostile to pitying. Then she saw why. Someone had plastered flyers all over the school entrance. Each one featured Caleb's face, a photo pulled from his old university ID, with bold text underneath, "Convicted research fraud. Do you know who's teaching your children?" Adrienne felt rage flood through her, hot and immediate. She grabbed one of the flyers and marched into the principal's office. Principal Morrison was already on the phone, her face drawn with stress. "I'm handling it," she was saying. "Yes, we're removing them now. No, I can't comment on—" She saw Adrienne and her expression shifted to something almost apologetic. "I'll call you back." She hung up. "Who did this?" Adrienne demanded. "We don't know. They were put up sometime last night. The cameras were disabled. Someone knew exactly where the blind spots were." "Disabled? This was planned." "It appears so." Morrison folded her hands on her desk. "Ms. Vale, I need to ask. Is there any truth to these allegations?" Caleb Hart was never convicted of anything. He was falsely accused by a colleague who stole his research. We're in the process of proving that. But there was an investigation, a sham investigation designed to protect the man who actually committed fraud. Adrienne threw the flyer on Morrison's desk. "This is a smear campaign. Someone's trying to intimidate me by going after the people I care about." Morrison looked uncomfortable. "I understand this is difficult, but I have to think about our other families. Parents are calling, asking questions. Some are threatening to pull their children if Mr. Hart continues to have access to the school. He's a private tutor. He picks Mason up from school. That's it." "I know, but the optics are that someone is using your school to spread lies." Adrienne leaned forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to send an email to every parent explaining that the flyers contain false information. You're going to make it clear that Caleb Hart has never been convicted of anything and that anyone spreading these rumors will be held accountable." Morrison hesitated. "Ms. Vale, I can't make accusations without proof." "Then find proof. Check your security footage, talk to your staff, do whatever you need to do. But if you let this slide, if you treat Caleb like he's guilty just because someone printed lies on cheap paper, I'll make sure every newspaper in this city knows that your school caves to anonymous intimidation." Morrison's face went tight. "That sounds like a threat." "It's a promise. Protect your students or protect your reputation. Your choice." Adrienne walked out before Morrison could respond. In the car, her hands were shaking. She gripped the steering wheel and forced herself to breathe, to think clearly instead of reactively. This was escalating faster than she'd anticipated. Whoever was behind this, Lang or someone working for him, they weren't just trying to discredit Caleb. They were trying to isolate him, to make it impossible for him to work, to exist in any space where people might believe him. She pulled out her phone and called her private investigator. "I need everything you can find on Victor Lang's associates," she said. "Staff, students, anyone who might be loyal enough to run interference for him. And I need it yesterday." The report came back within hours. Lang had a tight circle of former graduate students who'd gone on to successful careers in education, department chairs, principals, curriculum developers. People who owed their positions to his mentorship and recommendations. People who had every reason to protect him. One name stood out: Dr. Marcus Webb, currently the superintendent of a large school district in Seattle. He'd been Lang's research assistant during the years when Caleb was working at Oregon. He'd co-authored several papers with Lang, and according to Adrienne's investigator, he'd made several calls to Mason's school in the past week. Adrienne stared at the name, feeling pieces click into place. "Got you," she murmured. That evening, she sat down with Caleb and showed him everything. He looked at the flyers, the threatening note, the investigator's report, and his face went pale. "I told you this would happen," he said quietly. "I told you Lang would fight back. And I told you we'd be ready. Are we? Because it looks like he's winning." Caleb stood and paced to the window. "He's turning Mason's school against us. He's making it impossible for me to work. And we haven't even filed the lawsuit yet. This is just the warning shot. So what do you want to do? Back down? I want my son to be safe. I want to stop waking up wondering if today's the day Lang figures out where we live and decides to make things personal. Adrienne felt her chest tighten. Is he threatening Noah? Not directly, but these flyers weren't just about me. They're about anyone who trusts me, anyone who lets me near their kids. Caleb's voice was rough. How long before someone at Noah's school sees one? How long before parents start asking why he's being tutored by his fraud father? We'll get ahead of it. How? By threatening everyone into silence? By using your money to bully people into believing us? He turned to face her. That's not justice, Adrienne. That's just being the bigger bully. So we should let Lang destroy you because fighting back makes us look bad? I don't know. The words came out sharp, frustrated. I don't know what the right answer is. I just know that every day we keep pushing, things get worse for the people I love. And I'm starting to think the cost is too high. They stared at each other across the room, the weight of everything pressing down between them. Finally, Adrienne said, If you want to stop, we'll stop. But I need you to understand something first. What? Lang isn't going to leave you alone just because you back down. He's already started the war. The flyers, the phone calls, the intimidation, that's him making sure you stay silent permanently. And if we quit now, he wins. Not just this fight. Every fight. He gets to keep stealing, keep lying, keep destroying people who threaten him. That's not my responsibility. Maybe not, but it's happening anyway. Adrienne's voice softened. I'm not asking you to be a hero, Caleb. I'm asking you to decide who you want to be. The person who ran and hid for 6 years, or the person who fights back? Caleb looked away. You make it sound easy. It's not. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But at least you won't be doing it alone. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Okay, we keep going. But the second this touches Noah, the second he's in danger, I'm pulling him out and we're gone. Fair enough. They shook on it, and Adrienne tried to ignore the voice in her head, asking what she'd do if it came down to protecting Mason versus helping Caleb. She didn't have an answer yet. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later. Adrienne's legal team had put together a comprehensive case: intellectual property theft, fraud, intentional interference with economic advantage, and emotional distress. They were asking for $15 million in damages and a public retraction of Lang's claims to Caleb's research. The moment the papers were served, all hell broke loose. Lang held a press conference calling the lawsuit frivolous and vindictive. He appeared on 3 morning shows, playing the wounded professor being attacked by a bitter ex-colleague and his wealthy patron. He gave interviews describing Adrienne as a corporate bully who thought money could buy truth. And everywhere the narrative was the same: poor, honest academic versus rich, powerful CEO. David and Goliath, except Goliath had better PR. The media ate it up. Within days, Adrienne's company was being dragged into it. Competitors used the controversy to question her judgment. Shareholders started asking why she was spending time and resources on what looked like a personal vendetta. Her board called another emergency meeting. This is becoming a liability, her CFO said bluntly. 3 more clients pulled their contracts this morning. Our stock price dropped 4%. The optics are terrible. The optics will improve when we win the case. And if we lose, we won't. You can't guarantee that. Lang has institutional backing. He has public sympathy. And frankly, the evidence is more ambiguous than you're admitting. Adrienne felt her temper flare. The evidence is rock solid. We have timestamps, metadata, testimony. We have circumstantial evidence that suggests collaboration, not theft. Lang's lawyers will argue that he and Hart worked together, that the ideas emerged from joint discussions, that intellectual property in academic settings is inherently fuzzy. Her CFO leaned forward. Adrienne, I'm saying this as someone who cares about this company. You're letting your personal feelings cloud your judgment, and it's going to cost us. My personal feelings aren't the issue here, aren't they? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a grieving widow projecting her need for control onto a situation that has nothing to do with her. The room went silent. Adrienne stood slowly, her voice dangerously calm. Get out. Adrienne, I said get out. All of you. This meeting is over. They left, and Adrienne sat alone in her office, staring at the city below. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was letting this become too personal. Maybe the smart business decision was to settle quietly, make the problem go away, let Caleb fight his own battles. But every time she thought about backing down, she remembered Mason's face when he'd realized he wasn't broken. She remembered Caleb's voice cracking as he talked about his son. She remembered what it felt like to have power and choose to use it for something that mattered, and she knew she couldn't stop, even if it cost her everything. The breaking point came a month into the lawsuit. Adrienne was working late when her phone rang. Caleb's name flashed on the screen, and when she answered, his voice was shaking. They took him. Adrienne's blood went cold. Who took who? Noah. Someone. He was breathing too fast, barely coherent. I went to pick him up from school and he wasn't there. The teacher said a man showed up with paperwork saying he was authorized, but I never authorized anyone. Adrienne, someone took my son. Where are you? At the school. The police are here, but they're saying it might be a custody issue, that maybe my ex. But she's been dead for 3 years, Adrienne. She can't have. I'm on my way. Don't move. Adrienne grabbed her keys and ran. By the time she got to the school, there were 3 police cars in the parking lot, and Caleb was sitting on the curb with his head in his hands. She knelt beside him. What happened? He looked up and his eyes were red. A man came 2 hours ago. He had fake custody paperwork that looked official. The school called the number on the documents and someone confirmed it, so they released Noah to him. Did anyone get a description? White male, 40s, professional looking. That's it. The cameras were malfunctioning. Caleb's voice cracked. They took my kid and I don't even know who they are. Adrienne felt rage and fear war in her chest. She turned to the nearest police officer. I need you to issue an Amber Alert right now. Ma'am, we're still determining if this meets the criteria. A child was abducted from school by someone using forged documents. That's kidnapping. Issue the alert. The officer looked at his partner, who nodded reluctantly. While they made the calls, Adrienne pulled out her phone and dialed her head of security. Noah Hart was taken from Riverside Elementary approximately 2 hours ago. I need every camera within a 3-block radius pulled and analyzed. I need traffic cam footage. I need facial recognition on every adult who entered that school today. And I need it in the next 30 minutes. On it. She hung up and turned back to Caleb. We're going to find him. How? They could be anywhere by now. They could be. He couldn't finish the sentence. They won't hurt him. This is about scaring you, not harming him. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because if they wanted to hurt him, they wouldn't have bothered with the paperwork. This is psychological warfare. Caleb looked at her, desperate to believe. You really think Lang did this? Who else has motive? But kidnapping a child, that's insane. That's criminal. So is academic fraud. People who steal don't have boundaries, Caleb. They just get more creative about protecting what they've taken. 20 minutes later, her security chief called back. We got him. White Lexus, license plate matched to a rental car paid for by a shell corporation. We tracked it to a house in Bellevue. Sending you the address now. Adrienne grabbed Caleb's arm. Come on. Where are we going? To get your son back? The drive to Bellevue took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Caleb sat rigid in the passenger seat, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing shallow. What if he's not there? He asked. He's there. What if they run? They won't. How do you know? Adrienne glanced at him. Because I called the police and told them there's a kidnapped child at this address. They'll have units there in 5 minutes. Whoever took Noah won't get out. Caleb closed his eyes. If anything happens to him, it won't. You can't promise that. I just did. They pulled up to a modest house in a quiet neighborhood just as the police arrived. Adrienne parked and got out, Caleb right behind her. An officer stopped them. Ma'am, you need to stay back. That's my son in there, Caleb said. Sir, we're handling it. The front door opened and a man stepped out, hands raised. He was exactly as described, white, 40s, professional looking, and behind him, clearly visible through the doorway, was Noah. Caleb made a sound like he'd been punched and started forward. The officer grabbed him. Let us secure the scene first. That's my son. I understand, but we need to. Noah saw Caleb and screamed, Dad! He bolted past the man and ran straight to Caleb, who broke free from the officer and caught him. They went down in a heap on the lawn, Caleb sobbing into Noah's hair, while the boy clung to him. Adrienne watched the police take the man into custody, and her mind was already working. She pulled out her phone and took photos of his face, his car, the house. Then she walked over to where the officers were questioning him. "Who hired you?" she asked. The man looked at her and she saw calculation in his eyes. "I want a lawyer." "I'm sure you do. But here's something to think about while you wait for one. Kidnapping carries a minimum sentence of 20 years. Conspiracy to kidnap adds another 10. So unless you want to spend the rest of your life in prison, you might want to start talking about who paid you." "I'm not saying anything without legal representation." "Fine. But when your lawyer tells you how screwed you are, remember this conversation. Because the person who hired you, they're not going to protect you. They're going to let you take the fall while they walk away clean." She turned and walked back to where Caleb sat on the grass with Noah still wrapped around him. "Is he hurt?" she asked quietly. "No, just scared." Caleb looked up at her, his face raw. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We still need to prove Lang was behind this." "How?" "We follow the money. Shell corporations have owners. Rental cars have credit cards. This guy has phone records. Something will connect back to Lang." And she was right. It took 3 days, but Adrienne's investigative team traced the Shell Corporation to a law firm that had previously represented Victor Lang. The man who'd taken Noah, his name was Derek Moss, had a brother who'd been a teaching assistant in Lang's department. The connection was thin, but it was there. Adrienne's lawyers immediately filed an emergency motion with the court, presenting the evidence and arguing that Lang had orchestrated the kidnapping as intimidation. Lang's response was swift and vicious. He held another press conference denying any involvement, suggesting that Adrienne had staged the whole thing to gain sympathy. His lawyers filed a countermotion accusing her of witness tampering and evidence fabrication. The judge wasn't impressed with either side. "I'm going to be very clear," she said at the emergency hearing. "If I find that anyone involved in this case has engaged in witness intimidation, kidnapping, or any other criminal activity, I will personally ensure they face the maximum penalty. Do I make myself clear?" Both legal teams nodded. "Good. This case will proceed to trial. And if I see one more stunt like this from either party, I'll hold you all in contempt. Dismissed." They filed out of the courtroom and Adrienne felt exhaustion crash over her like a wave. This was bigger than she'd anticipated. Messier, more dangerous. And it was only going to get worse. That night, she sat with Caleb in her living room while both boys slept upstairs, Noah in Mason's room, the two of them refusing to be separated after the kidnapping. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quietly. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. He gestured vaguely. "For all of it." "You didn't drag me. I chose this." "Why?" He looked at her, genuinely confused. "Why risk your company, your reputation, your safety for someone you barely know?" Adrienne thought about how to answer that, about the night she'd heard Mason laughing, about the way Caleb had looked at her son like he mattered, about the quiet fury she'd felt learning that brilliant people could be destroyed by institutional cowardice. "Because someone had to," she said finally, "and I had the resources to do it." "That's not a reason. That's an excuse." "Fine. You want the real reason?" She met his eyes. "Because I spent 2 years watching my son disappear and telling myself there was nothing I could do, that the specialists knew better, that I just had to accept it, that some things couldn't be fixed. And then you showed up and proved that was a lie, that Mason wasn't broken. I just needed to stop listening to people who didn't know how to see him." Her voice went rough. "So yeah, maybe this is personal. Maybe I'm fighting for you because I'm angry at every system that tells people they're not enough. Because I'm tired of watching brilliant people get crushed by mediocre bullies who happen to have institutional power. Because—" She stopped, surprised by the intensity of her own emotion. "Because you matter. And I'm done pretending that's not worth fighting for." Caleb stared at her. Then he reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," he said. "You already thanked me." "I know. I'm thanking you again." They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, neither of them willing to name what was building between them. Because naming it would make it real. And real meant vulnerable. And vulnerable meant it could be taken away. The trial date was set for 3 months out. In the meantime, the media circus intensified. Every day brought new developments, new accusations, new ways for both sides to wound each other publicly. Lang's supporters organized rallies. Teachers posted videos defending his methods. Parents who'd used his books flooded social media with testimonials. But Adrian's team fought back. They found more victims, 3 additional researchers who'd had work stolen by Lang over the years. They compiled evidence of a systematic pattern of plagiarism. They built a case that was bigger than just Caleb, bigger than one stolen methodology. They were going after Lang's entire career. And slowly, painfully, the narrative began to shift. Journalists started digging deeper. Academic blogs began questioning Lang's originality. A few brave educators started speaking up about inconsistencies in his published work. The tide was turning. But it was turning slowly. And Lang wasn't going down without a fight. 1 week before the trial, Adrienne received another envelope. Inside was a photograph of Mason and Noah playing in her backyard, taken from outside the fence through a telephoto lens. On the back, someone had written, "Last Chance." Adrienne stared at it, feeling ice flood her veins. They'd crossed a line. Threatening her was one thing, but photographing children, implying harm, that was different. She called her security chief and tripled the protection around both boys. She installed panic buttons in every room. She made sure neither child was ever alone, even for a moment. And then she called a press conference of her own. Standing in front of cameras, holding the photograph, she spoke directly to whoever had sent it. "I know you're watching this. I know you think threatening children will make me back down. But you're wrong. Because every threat you make, every line you cross, every desperate attempt to silence us, it just proves we're right. You don't fight this hard to protect the truth. You fight this hard to protect a lie." She set the photograph down. "So here's my message. I'm not backing down. I'm not settling. I'm not going away. We're going to trial. We're going to present every piece of evidence. And when this is over, everyone will know exactly what Victor Lang is." She walked off the stage to an explosion of shouted questions, but she didn't answer them. She'd said what needed saying. Now it was time to finish what they'd started. The explosion came on a Tuesday. Not a literal explosion, though later, Adrienne would think it might have been easier if it had been. At least then she would have known exactly what she was dealing with. Instead, it started the way most disasters do, with a phone call she almost didn't answer. She was in a meeting with her executive team when her assistant interrupted, her face pale. "Ms. Vale, I'm sorry, but you need to take this. It's Mason's school." Adrienne's stomach dropped. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway, pressing the phone to her ear. "This is Adrienne Vale?" "Ms. Vale, this is Principal Morrison." The woman's voice was carefully neutral in a way that immediately set off alarms. "I'm calling because there's been an incident involving your son." "What kind of incident?" "I think it would be better if you came down to the school. We need to discuss this in person." "Tell me what happened to my son." There was a pause. Then Morrison said, "Mason was involved in an altercation with another student. He's not hurt, but what? The other child's parents are here. They're upset, and they're making some concerning allegations about Mason's behavior." Adrienne was already moving toward the elevator. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. She made it in 12. The principal's office was crowded when she arrived. Morrison sat behind her desk, looking miserable. Mason was huddled in a chair by the window, his face blotchy from crying. And standing in the center of the room like they owned it were 2 people Adrienne recognized immediately from the parent directory. Brian and Kelly Sutton, whose son Tyler was in Mason's class. Kelly Sutton turned when Adrienne entered, and her expression was pure venom. "Finally," she said. "We've been waiting for 20 minutes. I came as soon as I was called." Adrienne looked at Mason. "Are you okay, baby?" He nodded, but wouldn't meet her eyes. "He's fine," Brian Sutton said flatly. "Our son isn't." Adrienne turned to face them. "What happened?" "Your son attacked Tyler," Kelly said. "Shoved him into a locker during recess. Tyler has bruises on his shoulder and back." "Mason wouldn't do that." "Well, he did. Tyler told us everything. Apparently your son has been acting increasingly aggressive over the past few weeks." "That's not true," Mason said, his voice small. "Don't interrupt the adults," Brian snapped. Adrienne felt her anger ignite. "Don't talk to my son like that." "Maybe if someone talked to him properly, he wouldn't be violent," Kelly shot back. Principal Morrison raised her hands. "Everyone, please, let's stay calm." "I am calm," Adrienne said, though her voice had gone dangerously quiet. "I'm also waiting to hear what actually happened. Mason, tell me. Mason looked up at her, his eyes red. Tyler said mean things. About Caleb. Who's Caleb? Morrison asked. His tutor, Adrian said, not taking her eyes off her son. What did Tyler say? He said, Mason's voice cracked. He said Caleb was a loser, that his dad told him Caleb got fired from his real job because he was a fraud. And when I said that wasn't true, Tyler said you were stupid for hiring him. The room went very still. Adrian felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. She looked at Brian Sutton and saw the truth written all over his face. You've been talking about my employee, she said slowly. To your child. Brian's jaw tightened. I mentioned in passing that you'd hired someone with a questionable background. You didn't think your son would weaponize it, or you didn't think I'd find out. Look, I did some basic research after Tyler mentioned this Caleb guy was teaching Mason advanced material. I wanted to make sure he was qualified. Brian crossed his arms. Turns out he's not. He's a disgraced academic who got kicked out of the University of Oregon for research misconduct. That's public record. It's also a lie. It's documented. I can send you the articles. I've seen them. They're part of a smear campaign by the man who actually committed the fraud. Adrienne's voice was ice. But that's irrelevant. What's relevant is that you decided to share unverified gossip with a 10-year-old who then used it to bully my son. Kelly stepped forward. Tyler wasn't bullying anyone. He was sharing information. He called a man he's never met a loser to a child who cares about that man. That's bullying. And shoving someone into a locker is assault, Brian said. We could press charges. Do it. Adrian smiled, and it was the smile that made hedge fund managers nervous. I'll countersue for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I'll bury you in legal fees until you have to sell your house to pay your lawyers. And when I'm done, I'll make sure everyone in your professional network knows exactly what kind of people you are. Brian's face went red. Are you threatening us? I'm educating you about consequences, something you clearly failed to do with your son. Ms. Vale, Principal Morrison cut in, her voice strained, that's not helpful. You know what's not helpful? Adults using children as weapons. Adrian turned to Morrison. Did anyone actually witness what happened, or are we taking Tyler's word for it? Morrison hesitated. The playground monitor saw the end of the altercation. She said Mason pushed Tyler, but she didn't hear what led up to it. So we have one child's testimony against another's. Tyler has bruises, Kelly insisted, and Mason has emotional trauma from being verbally attacked. Where's the equity in punishment? We're not... Morrison stopped, clearly struggling. Look, I think everyone needs to take a step back. We can schedule a mediation session. No, Adrian said flatly. We're not mediating. Either you discipline Tyler for bullying, or I'm pulling Mason from this school and making sure every parent knows why. You can't do that, Brian said. Watch me. Kelly's eyes narrowed. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? Just because you have money. This has nothing to do with money. This has to do with protecting my child from people who think it's acceptable to attack a 7-year-old for defending someone he cares about. He assaulted our son. Your son tormented mine first. The argument spiraled from there, voices rising, accusations flying. Mason shrank further into his chair, his small body trembling. And somewhere in the noise, Adrian realized with brutal clarity that this wasn't really about the fight on the playground. This was about Victor Lang, because Brian Sutton had said it himself. He'd done research, which meant he'd found the articles, the academic rumors, the carefully constructed narrative that painted Caleb as unstable and dishonest. And if Brian had found it, others would too. The smear campaign was already working. By the time Adrienne left the school with Mason, her mind was racing. She called her head of security from the car. I need background checks on Brian and Kelly Sutton. Also their social networks, professional connections, anyone they might be talking to about my family. What am I looking for? Connections to the University of Oregon, specifically to a professor named Victor Lang. There was a pause. You think they're working for him? I think someone's feeding them information. I want to know who. She hung up and glanced at Mason in the rearview mirror. He was staring out the window, his face blank. You okay, kiddo? She asked quietly. I'm sorry I pushed Tyler. I know. Are you mad? Adrienne pulled into their driveway and turned to look at him. I'm mad that you were put in a position where you felt like you had to, but I'm not mad at you. Tyler said Caleb was bad. I had to tell him he was wrong. I know, baby, and you were right to defend him. But next time, use your words instead of your hands, okay? Mason nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. The fear that maybe Tyler had been right, that maybe Caleb really was what those articles said. She made a decision. Come on, she said, unbuckling her seatbelt. We're going to talk to Caleb. They found him in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He looked up when they entered, and his expression immediately shifted when he saw Mason's face. What happened? He asked. Mason burst into tears. Caleb was on his knees in an instant, pulling the boy into a hug. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. He just held Mason while the kid sobbed into his shoulder, murmuring quiet reassurances that Adrienne couldn't quite hear. She watched them, feeling something crack open in her chest. Finally, Mason pulled back, scrubbing at his face with his sleeve. Someone said mean things about you, and I got mad and I pushed him, and now everyone's mad at me. Who said mean things? Caleb asked gently. Tyler Sutton. He said his dad said you were a fraud. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. And you pushed him because of that? He was lying. Maybe. But pushing someone doesn't make the lie go away, does it? Mason shook his head miserably. Listen to me. Caleb put his hands on Mason's shoulders. People are going to say bad things about me, probably for a long time. And some of them are going to believe what they're saying because someone they trust told them it was true. That doesn't make it your job to fight everyone who believes it. But it's not fair. No, it's not. Caleb's expression was sad and tired and infinitely gentle. But you know what is fair? You being okay. You being safe. That matters more to me than what anyone says. Really? Really? Mason wiped his eyes again. I'm sorry. I know, buddy. Come here. Caleb hugged him again, and over Mason's head his eyes met Adrienne's. She saw the question there, the fear. Later, after Mason had gone upstairs to wash up for dinner, Adrienne found Caleb standing at the kitchen window, staring out at nothing. It's starting, he said quietly. What is? The attacks. Lang knows we're coming, so he's planting seeds, making sure people start asking questions about me before we can ask questions about him. Brian Sutton might not even be connected to Lang. You don't believe that? No, she didn't. Adrienne pulled out her phone and showed him the preliminary report her security chief had sent. Brian Sutton had been a graduate student at the University of Oregon 7 years ago, right around the time Caleb's career had imploded. Did you know him? She asked. Caleb studied the photo, then shook his head. No, but that doesn't mean he didn't know me or know of me. He set the phone down. Lang has followers, people who believed his version of events, who thought I was the villain. He could have reached out to any of them. Why now? Because you started making calls, because people started asking questions, because Caleb's voice went hard, because he knows we're not going to stop. Adrienne felt her anger crystallize into something sharp and focused. Then we hit harder, faster. We don't give him time to build momentum. Adrienne, you saw what just happened. He's using kids. If he's willing to do that at a school playground, what do you think he'll do when the stakes get higher? I think he'll find out what happens when someone pushes back. She met his eyes. I'm not backing down. I know, that's what scares me. The words hung between them. That night, Adrienne couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Mason's face in the principal's office, about the way he'd folded into himself when the Suttons started yelling, about the calculated cruelty of using a child to deliver a message. At 2 a.m, she gave up and went down to her office. Her laptop was still open, files spread across the screen, everything her investigative team had compiled on Victor Lang over the past 3 weeks. And there was a lot. Lang had built an empire on Caleb's stolen research, 3 best-selling books, a Netflix documentary series, consulting contracts with school districts across the country. He was scheduled to keynote a major education conference in Chicago next month, with an estimated audience of 5,000 teachers and administrators. 5,000 people who believed he was a visionary. Adrienne pulled up the conference website and stared at Lang's headshot. He was handsome in that carefully curated academic way, salt and pepper hair, expensive glasses, the kind of smile that said, I'm approachable but brilliant. She hated him on sight. Her phone buzzed, a message from her lead attorney. "We've got something. Call me when you're awake." Adrienne dialed immediately. "It's 3 in the morning, David Chen said when he answered. "Do you sleep?" "Not anymore. What do you have?" "Metadata analysis on Lang's published papers. We compared timestamps on his drafts to timestamps on Caleb's research files." She heard papers rustling. "Adrienne, Caleb's files predate Lang's publications by months, sometimes years. The evidence of theft is ironclad. Enough to go public? Enough to destroy his career, but what? We need to be careful about how we release it. Lang has institutional backing. If we come at him wrong, the university will close ranks and protect him. We'll get buried in NDAs and settlement offers before we can get any real traction. So what do you suggest?" "We need someone on the inside, someone with credibility in the academic community who's willing to go on record." Adrienne thought about that. "What about his former colleagues, people who worked with Caleb before everything fell apart?" "Most of them sided with Lang. The ones who didn't are too scared to speak up." "Everyone's scared until they're not." Adrienne's mind was already moving. "Get me a list of every academic who's published papers critical of Lang's methodology. Every researcher who's questioned his work. I'll start making calls." "That could take weeks. Then we'd better work fast." She hung up and pulled up her contact list. It was 3 in the morning on the West Coast, which meant it was 6 on the East. Early, but not unreasonable for academics. The first 3 people she called didn't answer. The 4th did. "Dr. Elizabeth Morrison," Adrienne said. "Speaking. Who is this?" "My name is Adrienne Vale. I'm calling about Victor Lang." There was a long silence. Then Morrison said very carefully, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You published a paper 2 years ago questioning the validity of his visual learning framework. You suggested his data might be compromised. That paper was retracted, under pressure from Lang's publisher, who threatened to sue you for defamation." Another silence. "Ms. Vale, I don't know what you want, but I can't help you. I have a career to protect." "I understand, but what if I told you I have evidence that Lang's entire methodology was stolen from another researcher? That everything he's published in the last 8 years is based on fraud?" Morrison let out a breath. "I'd say you're playing with fire. I've been playing with fire my entire life. It's what I do best. Lang will destroy you." "He can try." Adrienne leaned back in her chair. "Dr. Morrison, I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to tell the truth. And I'm offering you resources to do it safely. Legal protection, media support, whatever you need." "Why?" "Because he's hurting children, and because someone needs to stop him." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll think about it. I need an answer by Friday." "That's 2 days." "Yes." Morrison laughed, but it was bitter. "You don't ask for much, do you?" "I ask for exactly as much as the situation requires, and this situation requires courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Adrienne hung up and made 6 more calls. By the time the sun came up, she'd spoken to 9 academics. 3 had hung up on her. 4 had said no outright. 2 had said maybe. It was enough to start. Over the next 48 hours, things moved fast. Adrienne's legal team filed a formal complaint with the University of Oregon's Research Integrity Office, demanding an investigation into Lang's publication history. The complaint included metadata evidence, comparative analysis of research files, and sworn testimony from Caleb about the theft. The university's response came back in 24 hours. They would look into it, but any investigation would take months. "Months, Yikis," Adrienne said flatly when her lawyer called to tell her. "They're stalling." Of course they're stalling. Lang brings in millions in grant funding. They're not going to throw him under the bus without a fight. "Then we give them a reason to fight." She called the journalist at the New York Times. "I have a story for you," she said. "Academic fraud at a major university. Stolen research, fabricated credentials, institutional cover-up, and a paper trail that proves all of it." The journalist's name was Marcus Reed, and he'd been trying to write a profile on Adrienne for 3 years. She'd turned him down every time. Now she was handing him something better. "What's the catch?" he asked. "No catch, but I need you to move fast. I'm sending you encrypted files tonight. You'll have 72 hours to verify the story before we go to other outlets." Why the rush? Because the longer we wait, the more time they have to bury it. They? Read the files. You'll understand. She hung up and sent the data package. Then she called Caleb. We're going public, she said. This Friday. She heard him exhale. Are you sure? No, but waiting isn't making us safer. Mason got attacked at school, and that was before anyone really knew what we were doing. Once Lang figures out we've filed a formal complaint, it's going to get worse. So we escalate. We end it, one way or another. Caleb was quiet. Then he said, Noah's been having nightmares. Adrienne's chest tightened. About what? About people taking him away. About losing me. His voice was rough. He's 9 years old, Adrienne. He shouldn't have to worry about this. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like we're putting both our kids in the line of fire. We are, Adrienne said quietly. But the alternative is letting Lang win. And if he wins, how many more kids like Mason and Noah get crushed by a system that tells them they're broken? That's not our responsibility. Maybe not, but it's the right thing to do. Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. You sound like someone who's never lost everything. You're wrong. I lost my husband. I watched my son disappear into grief for 2 years. I know what loss feels like. Adrienne's voice hardened, and I know that hiding from it doesn't make it hurt less. It just makes you smaller. The line went quiet. Then Caleb said, Okay, Friday. But after this, if things go bad, if Lang comes after our kids, we pull back. Agreed? Agreed. She hung up, but the promise sat heavy in her stomach, because she knew, even if Caleb didn't, that there was no pulling back, not anymore. Friday morning, the New York Times published the story. Acclaimed education expert accused of research theft. The article was devastating. Marcus Reed had done his homework, interviews with former colleagues, analysis of published papers, a timeline that made the theft impossible to deny. He'd even tracked down 2 of the academics Adrienne had contacted, both of whom went on record questioning Lang's credibility. By noon, the story had been picked up by every major news outlet. By 2, Lang had issued a statement calling the allegations baseless and defamatory. By 4, the university had announced a formal investigation. And by 6, Adrienne's phone was ringing nonstop with calls from reporters, lawyers, and people she hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to know what the hell was happening. She ignored most of them and focused on the one that mattered. Ms. Vale, this is Dean Patricia Harmon from the University of Oregon. I think we need to talk. Adrienne put the call on speaker so her legal team could hear. I'm listening. The allegations against Dr. Lang are serious. We're taking them very seriously. Good. However, I want to be clear that this institution will not tolerate character assassination. If you or your associates have fabricated evidence, we haven't, and you know it. I know that you've made a lot of noise very quickly. That suggests an agenda beyond simple truth-seeking. Adrienne smiled coldly. My agenda is protecting my son, and every other child who's been failed by people like Lang. Dr. Lang is a respected member of our faculty. Dr. Lang is a thief, and your institution enabled him. So either you do the right thing and hold him accountable, or I make sure everyone knows you chose protecting a fraud over protecting the truth. Harmon's voice went icy. Are you threatening me? I'm clarifying the stakes. You have 2 choices. Investigate thoroughly and transparently, or spend the next 5 years in court while your funding dries up and your reputation crumbles. Your call. She hung up before Harmon could respond. Her head lawyer looked impressed. That was aggressive. That was necessary. Adrienne stood and walked to the window. Below, protesters had gathered outside the Vale Tower, a small group holding signs that read, Stop corporate bullying and leave Dr. Lang alone. She stared at them, feeling cold. Who organized that? She asked. Her security chief pulled up his tablet. Social media campaign, started about an hour after the Times article dropped. The accounts are mostly anonymous, but the language suggests coordination. Lang's people, probably. Adriana watched the protesters chant and felt something harden in her chest. This was what Caleb had warned her about. The institutional power, the loyal followers, the willingness to weaponize public opinion. But she'd faced worse. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. You made a mistake. This ends badly for you. She showed it to her security chief. Can you trace it? She asked. Already on it. 5 minutes later, he had an answer. Burner phone, bought yesterday with cash at a convenience store in Eugene, Oregon. Eugene, where the university was located. Adrienne forwarded the text to her lawyer. Add this to the file. Evidence of intimidation. Then she called Caleb. Are you okay? She asked. Define okay. His voice was tight. I've had 3 reporters show up at my apartment in the last hour. Noah's terrified. Come to my house, both of you. I have security here. Adrienne, I'm not asking. Pack a bag and get over here. Now. 20 minutes later, Caleb and Noah arrived. Noah was a smaller, quieter version of his father. Dark hair, serious eyes. The look of a kid who'd learned too early that the world wasn't safe. He clutched a worn backpack and stayed close to Caleb's side as they entered the house. Mason appeared at the top of the stairs, curious. Who's that? He asked. This is Noah, Adrienne said. He's Caleb's son. They're going to stay with us for a while. The 2 boys stared at each other. Then Noah said, very quietly, Do you like Star Wars? Mason's face lit up. Yeah. Cool. Me too. And just like that, they disappeared upstairs together. Adrienne looked at Caleb. He was standing in the middle of her pristine foyer, looking lost and furious and exhausted all at once. This is my fault, he said. No, it's Lang's fault. I shouldn't have let you do this. I should have stayed quiet, kept my head down, and let him keep hurting people? Let Mason keep struggling because I was too afraid to fight? Adrienne stepped closer. You didn't do this to us, Caleb. Lang did, and now we're going to make him pay for it. You can't promise that. Watch me. He met her eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them, something raw and fragile and far too complicated to name. Then his phone rang. Caleb answered it, listened for a moment, and his face went white. What? Adrienne demanded. He lowered the phone. That was my lawyer. Lang just filed a defamation suit against both of us. For how much? $20 million. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Adrienne felt rage flood through her, hot and sharp. He's trying to bankrupt us into silence. It's working. I don't have $20 million. I don't have 20,000. But I do. She pulled out her phone. And I have lawyers who eat people like Lang for breakfast. Adrienne, this is insane. No. What's insane is letting a bully win because he's louder and meaner and has more institutional backing. What's insane is teaching our kids that the truth doesn't matter if the other side has better lawyers. She hit dial. We're not backing down. We're going to war. And outside, the protesters kept chanting. The lawsuit was just the beginning. Over the next week, Lang unleashed everything he had. Op-eds in education journals defending his work. Interviews on national television calling Adrienne a vindictive billionaire with a personal vendetta. Social media campaigns painting Caleb as a disgruntled former employee trying to sabotage a brilliant researcher. And everywhere, the same narrative. Adrienne Vale was using her wealth and power to destroy an innocent man because he dared to criticize her parenting choices. It was vicious, it was coordinated, and it was working. Adrienne's board called an emergency meeting to discuss whether her personal controversies were affecting the company's reputation. 3 major clients pulled their contracts, citing concerns about leadership stability. The protesters outside her building grew larger, angrier, more aggressive. And through it all, Adrienne kept fighting. She hired a crisis PR firm. She gave interviews to friendly journalists. She released more evidence, emails, research files, testimony from people who'd worked with both Lang and Caleb. But for every piece of evidence she released, Lang had a counter-narrative. For every witness who spoke up, he had 2 more who defended him. The media loved it. Billionaire CEO versus celebrated professor. Corporate power versus academic integrity. It was the perfect storm of outrage and drama, and neither side was willing to back down. Mason stopped going to school after someone spray-painted Liar's Kid on his locker. Noah started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done in years. And Caleb started drinking. Adrienne found him one night in her study, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the desk beside him. This has to stop, he said when she walked in. It will. When we win. We're not winning, we're drowning. He gestured at the laptop screen, where a cable news segment was playing on mute. Lang's face filled the frame, earnest and concerned. Look at him. He's not scared. He's thriving on this. Because he's a narcissist. They always do. And what does that make us? Adrienne sat down across from him. It makes us people who give a damn about something bigger than ourselves. Caleb laughed bitterly. Is it bigger than our kids? Because right now it feels like we're sacrificing them for a principle. We're protecting them by showing them that bullies don't get to win just because they're louder. They're 7 and 9 years old, Adrienne. They don't care about principles. They care about feeling safe. His voice cracked. And I can't make Noah feel safe anymore. Every time someone yells outside the house, he thinks they're coming for us. He asked me yesterday if we were going to have to run again. We're not running. Maybe we should. The words hung between them. Adrienne felt something cold settle in her chest. You want to quit. I want my son to sleep through the night. I want him to stop asking me if I'm a bad person. Caleb rubbed his face. I want this to be over. It will be, after the hearing. The hearing was scheduled for next week, a formal academic review where the university would examine the evidence and determine whether Lang had committed research misconduct. It was supposed to be their moment of vindication, the point where everything they'd sacrificed would finally matter. But Caleb didn't look convinced. What if we lose? He asked quietly. We won't. You can't know that. I know the evidence. I know the truth. That has to count for something. Does it? Caleb met her eyes. Because from where I'm sitting, the truth is just another weapon, and Lang's better at using it than we are. Adrienne didn't have an answer for that. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She kept running through scenarios, imagining every way it could go wrong. What if the university sided with Lang anyway? What if they buried the evidence? What if all of this, the lawsuits, the protests, the damage to their kids, had been for nothing? At 3 a.m, she gave up and went downstairs. Mason was in the kitchen, eating cereal in the dark. Can't sleep either? Adrienne asked. He shook his head. She sat down next to him. You scared about tomorrow? Yeah. Me too. Mason looked at her, surprised. Really? Really? But you know what I keep remembering? What? That night I came home and found you laughing with Caleb. You were so happy, so alive, and I realized I'd been failing you without even knowing it. Adrienne touched his hair. I'm fighting for that version of you, kiddo. The one who knows he's brilliant, who knows he matters. What if we lose? Then we lose. But at least we'll know we tried. Mason considered that. Then he said, I don't want Noah to be sad anymore. I know, baby. He's my friend now. We watch Star Wars together and he explains all the science stuff. He's really smart. Just like you. Just like me. Mason smiled a little. Do you think things will get better after tomorrow? Adrienne wanted to lie, wanted to promise him that everything would be fine, that the hearing would fix everything, that their lives would go back to normal. But she'd already lied to him too many times. Every time she'd pretended he was okay when he wasn't, every time she'd told herself the specialists knew better than she did. So instead, she told him the truth. I don't know, she said, but I'm going to keep fighting until they are. Mason nodded, and then, unexpectedly, he leaned against her shoulder. Adrienne wrapped her arm around him and held on tight. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just didn't know yet how much. The hearing room was smaller than Adrienne expected. She'd imagined something grand, mahogany panels, high ceilings, the weight of institutional authority pressing down from every angle. Instead, it was just a windowless conference room in the basement of the administration building, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, cheap carpet that smelled faintly of mildew. But the people inside made it feel like a courtroom anyway. The review panel sat at the head of the table. 5 academics whose faces Adrienne had memorized over the past week. Dean Patricia Harmon in the center, flanked by 2 senior professors and 2 outside experts brought in to ensure impartiality. They looked tired and irritated, like people who'd been dragged into a mess they wanted no part of. Victor Lang sat on the opposite side of the room with his legal team. 3 lawyers in expensive suits who radiated the kind of quiet confidence that came from winning. Lang himself looked perfectly composed, charcoal blazer, blue shirt open at the collar, the picture of academic credibility under siege. He didn't even glance at Adrienne when she entered. Caleb sat beside her, rigid and pale. His hands were clenched so tight on the table that his knuckles had gone white. Breathe, Adrienne murmured. I'm trying. Dean Harmon cleared her throat. Let's begin. This is a formal inquiry into allegations of research misconduct brought against Dr. Victor Lang by Mr. Caleb Hart and Ms. Adrienne Vale. We'll hear opening statements, review the evidence, and allow both parties to respond. Dr. Lang, you'll go first. Lang stood, and the room seemed to shift its attention to him like iron to a magnet. Thank you, Dean Harmon. His voice was measured, almost gentle. I want to start by saying how deeply painful this has been. Not just for me, but for my family, my students, and the thousands of educators who've implemented my methodologies in their classrooms. To have my life's work questioned, my integrity attacked, it's been devastating. Adrienne felt her jaw tighten. He was good, calm, sympathetic, just vulnerable enough to seem human without appearing weak. The allegations against me are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how collaborative research works, Lang continued. Yes, I worked closely with Mr. Hart during his postdoctoral fellowship. Yes, we discussed ideas, shared data, built on each other's insights. That's what colleagues do. But to suggest I stole his work, that I systematically plagiarized his research and passed it off as my own, that's not just false. It's a deliberate distortion designed to salvage Mr. Hart's failed career at my expense. Caleb flinched beside her. Lang pressed on. Mr. Hart was a talented researcher. I genuinely believe that. But he struggled with the pressures of academic life. He missed deadlines, clashed with colleagues, made accusations when his work wasn't accepted for publication. Eventually, the university had no choice but to part ways with him. And rather than take responsibility for his own shortcomings, he spent the last 6 years building a conspiracy theory about me. That's not true, Caleb said, his voice rough. Harmon held up a hand. You'll have your chance to respond, Mr. Hart. Lang smiled sadly. I understand why he's doing this. Failure is hard. It's easier to blame someone else than to accept that maybe you weren't ready for the academic pressure. But bringing Ms. Vale into this, using her resources and influence to weaponize those feelings, that crosses a line. He looked directly at Adrienne for the first time. Ms. Vale is a powerful woman, he said. She's used to getting what she wants. And what she wants is someone to blame for her son's struggles. I sympathize with that. Parenting is difficult, but turning her grief into a vendetta against me won't help her child. It will only hurt innocent people. Adrienne met his gaze and didn't blink. Lang sat down, and one of his lawyers slid a folder across the table to the panel. We've submitted a comprehensive timeline of Dr. Lang's publications, along with documentation of the collaborative research process. You'll see that every paper was properly attributed, every source cited, every contribution acknowledged. Harmon opened the folder and began reviewing it. The other panel members did the same. After a long moment, Harmon looked up. Ms. Vale, Mr. Hart, your opening statement. Adrienne stood. She'd prepared for this, rehearsed it with her lawyers, refined it until every word hit exactly where it needed to. But now, looking at Lang's smug face, she felt the script crumble away. Dr. Lang is lying, she said flatly. He didn't just collaborate with Caleb Hart. He stole from him, systematically, deliberately, and then he destroyed Caleb's career to cover it up. One of Lang's lawyers started to object, but Harmon waved him off. Continue, Ms. Vale. Adrienne pulled out her own folder, thicker, more detailed, organized with the precision that had made her a billionaire. We have metadata showing that Caleb's research files predate Dr. Lang's publications by months or years. We have emails where Lang specifically asks for access to unpublished data. We have testimony from colleagues who witnessed the theft, and we have a pattern of behavior that shows Lang has done this before, taken credit for other people's work, silenced anyone who questioned him, and used his institutional power to make problems disappear. She slid the folder to Harmon. Everything's documented. Timestamps, file comparisons, witness statements. Dr. Lang didn't collaborate with Caleb. He parasitized him. Lang's lawyer stood. This is character assassination, not evidence. It's both, Adrienne shot back. Character matters when someone spent 6 years lying about who they are. Ms. Vale, Harmon said, her voice sharp. Please stick to the facts. These are facts. Adrienne pointed at Lang. That man built his entire career on stolen research. He's written 3 best-selling books using methodologies he didn't develop. He's consulted with school districts across the country, charging them hundreds of thousands of dollars for programs he didn't create. And when the person he stole from tried to fight back, Lang used this institution's power to silence him. Mr. Hart was dismissed for cause, Lang said calmly. The university investigated his conduct and found, "The university protected you because you brought in grant money," Adrian interrupted. "Because you were famous and Caleb was nobody. That's not justice. That's corruption." The room erupted. Lang's lawyers were on their feet, objecting. Harmon was calling for order. Caleb was staring at the table, his shoulders hunched like he wanted to disappear. And through it all, Adrienne kept talking. "You want to know why I'm here?" she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Because Caleb Hart is the reason my son is thriving for the first time in 2 years. Because his teaching methods actually work. Because children who've been labeled slow or broken are learning to see themselves as brilliant. And the man who created those methods is cleaning houses while the man who stole them gets standing ovations." She looked at each panel member in turn. "So yes, I'm using my resources. I'm using my influence. Because someone has to. And if that makes me vindictive or grief-stricken or whatever narrative Dr. Lang wants to spin, fine, I don't care. I care about the truth. And the truth is sitting in that folder in front of you." She sat down. The room was silent. Harmon looked at the folder, then at Lang, then back at the folder. "We'll review the evidence and hear testimony. Dr. Lang, you may call your first witness." What followed was brutal. Lang's team brought in former colleagues who testified that Caleb had been difficult to work with, that he'd made wild accusations, that his research had been sloppy and inconclusive. They brought in a department administrator who confirmed that Caleb's dismissal had followed proper procedure. They brought in an expert witness, another education researcher from Stanford, who analyzed the disputed papers and concluded that Lang's work showed independent development of parallel ideas. It was a masterclass in institutional gaslighting, and it was working. Adrienne could see it in the panel members' faces. The doubt creeping in, the questions about whether maybe this was just a disgruntled former employee with a grudge. When it was their turn, Caleb's lawyer called their own witnesses. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the academic Adrienne had convinced to speak up, testified about the pressure Lang's publisher had put on her to retract her critical paper. A forensic data analyst walked through the metadata evidence, showing point by point how Caleb's files predated Lang's work. A former research assistant who'd worked in Lang's lab admitted under oath that she'd seen him using Caleb's unpublished data without attribution. But for every witness they called, Lang's team had a counter-narrative. Morrison was bitter about losing her 10-year battle. The data analyst's methodology was questionable. The research assistant was seeking attention. By the time they broke for lunch, Adrienne felt like they were losing ground. She found Caleb in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed. "How bad is it?" he asked without opening them. "I don't know." "That means bad." "It means it's not over yet." She touched his arm. "We still have one more witness." Caleb opened his eyes. "Me." "You." He let out a shaky breath. "What if I screw it up?" "You won't." "You don't know that." "I know you. I know what you built. I know what he took from you." Adrienne stepped closer. "Tell them that. Not the academic version. The real version. Make them understand what he did." "They won't care." "Then make them care." The afternoon session started with Caleb on the stand. Lang's lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Vance, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Hart, you were dismissed from the University of Oregon in 2019, is that correct?" "Yes." "And the university cited research misconduct as the reason for your dismissal." "That was the claim. It wasn't true." "But there was an investigation." "Yes." "And that investigation found evidence of fabricated data and plagiarism." Caleb's jaw tightened. "The investigation was a sham. Lang controlled it from the beginning. Please answer the question, Mr. Hart. Did the investigation find evidence of misconduct?" "It claimed to, but the evidence was, yes or no, Mr. Hart." "Yes, but—" "Thank you." Vance smiled thinly. "So the university, your employer at the time, conducted a formal investigation and determined that you had committed research misconduct. And you're now asking this panel to believe that investigation was wrong?" "I'm asking them to look at the actual evidence instead of accepting Lang's version of events. The actual evidence shows a pattern of concerning behavior on your part. Missed deadlines, conflicts with colleagues, accusations of theft when your work wasn't accepted for publication. Vance picked up a document. In fact, your department chair at the time noted that you showed signs of paranoia and instability, that you believed Dr. Lang was out to get you, despite no evidence supporting that claim. That's not... Caleb stopped, visibly fighting for control. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. Were you? Vance leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a man who couldn't handle academic pressure invented a conspiracy theory to explain his own failures. And now, 6 years later, you've convinced a wealthy woman to bankroll your revenge fantasy. It's not a fantasy. Lang stole my work, so you say. But you have no contemporaneous documentation of that theft, do you? No emails where Dr. Lang explicitly admits to plagiarism. No witnesses who saw him copy your files, just metadata and timestamps that could be interpreted multiple ways. The timestamps prove that you created files before Dr. Lang published papers. They don't prove he stole your ideas. Ideas aren't copyrightable, Mr. Hart. And in collaborative research environments, it's often difficult to determine who originated what concept. Caleb's hands were shaking. This wasn't collaboration. He took my methodology, my entire framework for teaching visual spatial learners, and published it as his own. He didn't give me credit, didn't acknowledge my contribution, didn't include you as a co-author, you mean? Yes, and that hurt. I imagine it felt like betrayal. It was betrayal. Or, Vance's voice went soft, almost sympathetic. Or it was a mentor making a professional judgment that your contribution didn't warrant co-authorship, that your role in the research was more limited than you believed. And rather than accept that judgment, you let your hurt feelings turn into obsession. That's not what happened, isn't it? Because the alternative is that a respected professor with decades of experience and an impeccable reputation suddenly decided to risk everything by stealing work from a junior colleague. Does that make sense to you? Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. Adrienne could see him unraveling, could see the doubt creeping into his expression, the voice in his head asking the same question Lang's lawyer was asking. What if he was wrong? What if he'd misremembered, misunderstood, built a story out of hurt feelings and professional disappointment? She wanted to stand up, to object, to do something. But this wasn't her fight, not yet. Vance pressed on. Let's talk about your son, Mr. Hart. Caleb's head snapped up. Leave him out of this. I'm afraid I can't. Because your son is the reason you're here, isn't he? You said in your deposition that you left academia to protect him, to give him a better life. That's right. And yet here you are, 6 years later, dragging him through a very public legal battle, exposing him to media scrutiny, protesters, threats. How is that protecting him? I'm fighting for the truth. You're fighting for vindication. There's a difference. Vance's voice hardened. You want the panel to believe that Dr. Lang stole your research. But what you're really asking for is validation. You want someone to tell you that you were right all along, that your career didn't fail because of your own limitations. It failed because someone sabotaged you. He did sabotage me. Or you sabotaged yourself by refusing to accept reality, by clinging to a narrative where you're the victim instead of taking responsibility for your choices. Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I know what he did. I know what I lost. And no amount of courtroom games is going to change that. Harmon banged her gavel. Mr. Hart, please sit down. But Caleb was done. Adrienne could see it in his eyes, the moment where the weight of everything became too much. The years of hiding, the fear for his son, the grinding exhaustion of fighting an enemy who had every advantage. He sat, but something in him had broken. Vance smiled. No further questions. When the session adjourned, Adrienne found Caleb in a side room, his head in his hands. I screwed it up, he said, without looking up. No, you didn't. She made me look like a lunatic. Like everything I've said for 6 years is just... He laughed bitterly. Maybe it is. Maybe I did invent all of this because I couldn't handle failure. Stop. Why? It's the same thing everyone's been saying since 2019. The same thing the university said. The same thing my former colleagues said. Maybe they were right. Adrienne grabbed his shoulders and forced him to look at her. Listen to me. Lang is a liar. His lawyer is a liar. And they're very, very good at making people doubt themselves. But the evidence doesn't lie. The timestamps, the metadata, the testimony, it's all real. Then why do I feel like we're losing? Because that's what they want you to feel. Because if you give up, they win by default. Caleb pulled away from her. I can't do this anymore, Adrienne. I can't keep fighting when every fight just makes things worse for Noah, for Mason, for... He stopped, his voice breaking. I'm tired. I know. So what do we do? Adrienne looked at him, really looked at him. At the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the defeat weighing down his shoulders. And she made a decision. We hit him where it hurts, she said. The final session started an hour later. Adrienne had spent that hour on the phone with her investigative team, pulling together one last piece of evidence she'd been holding in reserve. It was risky, the kind of move that could backfire spectacularly, but they were out of options. Harmon called the session to order. Does either party have additional evidence to present? Adrienne stood. Yes, we'd like to call a witness. Lang's lawyer frowned. That wasn't on the witness list. It's a rebuttal witness. We're entitled to call one. Harmon considered, then nodded. Who's the witness? Mason Vale, Adrienne said. My son. The room erupted. Lang's team was on their feet immediately, objecting. Harmon was shaking her head. Even Caleb was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. Absolutely not, Vance said. He's 7 years old. This is highly irregular. He's the victim of the methodology Dr. Lang claims to have developed, Adrienne said calmly. He has first-hand experience with both Lang's published approach and Caleb Hart's original framework. His testimony is relevant. He's a child being coached by his mother. He's a child whose educational outcomes speak for themselves, and I think the panel deserves to hear from him. Harmon looked deeply uncomfortable. Ms. Vale, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but putting a child on the stand is well within the bounds of academic review proceedings. You're not a court of law, you're an investigative body, and my son has information relevant to your investigation. Harmon glanced at the other panel members. They conferred in whispers, then Harmon turned back to Adrienne. 5 minutes, she said. That's all. Adrienne nodded and stepped into the hall. Mason was waiting there with her assistant, looking small and nervous in his button-down shirt and khakis. Hey, kiddo, she said, kneeling down. You ready? Mason nodded, but his eyes were wide. Will Dr. Lang be in there? Yes. Is he scary? Adrienne thought about how to answer that. Then she said, he's going to try to make you doubt yourself, to make you think you're wrong about what you know. But you're not wrong, Mason. You're brilliant, and I need you to show them that. What if I mess up? Then you mess up. But at least you tried. She touched his cheek. Can you do this for me? Mason took a deep breath. Okay. They walked into the hearing room together. Lang's expression when he saw Mason was carefully controlled, but Adrienne caught the flicker of rage underneath. He hadn't expected this. None of them had. Mason climbed into the witness chair, his feet dangling above the floor. Harmon leaned forward. Mason, do you know why you're here? To talk about learning, Mason said, his voice small but steady. That's right. And I want you to know that no one here is going to hurt you or be mean to you, okay? We just want to ask you some questions. Mason nodded. Adrienne stepped forward. Mason, can you tell the panel about your school experience before Caleb started teaching you? It was bad, Mason said simply. The teacher said I was slow. She gave me baby work. What kind of work? Like counting to 10 and coloring shapes, stuff for kindergarten. He scrunched up his face. I'm in 2nd grade. I already know how to count to 1,000,000. One of the panel members smiled despite herself. And how did that make you feel? Adrienne asked. Sad and bored. I stopped trying because nothing mattered anyway. When did that change? When Caleb started showing me the cool way to learn, with pictures and colors and stuff that makes sense. Can you explain what you mean by makes sense? Mason thought about it. Like, in school they just tell you rules. Add this number, get that answer, but they don't show you why. Caleb shows you why. He makes pictures of the math so you can see it working. Adrienne pulled out one of Mason's drawings, the visual models he'd created for understanding physics concepts. Did you make this? Yeah, that's gravity. See, the arrows point down because everything's pulling to the center, and the bigger the circle, the stronger the pull. Who taught you that? Caleb, and do you understand it? Mason gave her a look like that was the dumbest question he'd ever heard. Of course I understand it. I made it. Adrienne turned to the panel. Mason is 7 years old. 6 months ago, his teacher said he was developmentally delayed. Now he's teaching himself physics using visual models that, according to Dr. Lang's published research, are revolutionary tools for neurodivergent learners. She picked up one of Lang's books and opened it to a marked page. This is from Dr. Lang's bestseller, Teaching the Unseen Mind. Chapter 7, page 112. It describes a methodology for using color-coded visual systems to teach abstract concepts to children with learning differences. She showed Mason the diagram on the page. Does this look familiar? Mason studied it. That's like what Caleb taught me, but his is better. How is it better? The colors are wrong in the book. Red should be for pushing, blue for pulling, and the arrows should be thicker when the force is stronger. Caleb's way makes more sense. Adrienne felt something fierce and proud swell in her chest. Who taught you that red means pushing and blue means pulling? Caleb. When did he teach you that? When I first started learning, like 4 months ago. And when was Dr. Lang's book published? Mason shrugged. I don't know. Adrienne looked at the panel. 3 months ago. Dr. Lang's book, which supposedly represents years of research and development, was published 3 months ago. My son learned this methodology 4 months ago, from Caleb Hart. Vance was on her feet. This proves nothing. Dr. Lang's research predates this child's education. Does it? Adrienne pulled out another folder. Because I had my team do a comparative analysis. Every visual model in Lang's book, every color coding system, every pedagogical approach, they all appear first in Caleb's original research files, files that are time-stamped years before Lang's publications. She slid the folder to Harmon. But more than that, Caleb's methods work. My son is living proof. Mason went from being labeled learning disabled to teaching himself advanced physics in 6 months. Not because of Dr. Lang's published research, because of the original framework that Caleb Hart developed and Lang stole. The room went silent. Then Lang spoke for the first time since the session started. May I ask the child a question? His voice was calm, almost gentle. Harmon hesitated, then nodded. Lang stood and walked closer to Mason. Not threatening, just present. Mason, you like Caleb a lot, don't you? Mason nodded warily. And your mom likes him too. I guess. So you want to help them. You want to say things that make them happy. I'm not lying, Mason said, his voice getting smaller. I'm not saying you are. But sometimes, when we care about people, we remember things the way they want us to remember them, not the way they actually happened. Lang smiled kindly. Like, maybe Caleb showed you that diagram in my book, and you both thought it was his idea. But really, he read my book and taught you from it. That doesn't make anyone bad. It just means memories are complicated. Mason looked at his mother, confused. And Adrienne saw what Lang was doing, planting doubt, making a 7-year-old question his own mind. She was about to intervene when Mason said, very quietly, "That's not what happened." Lang raised an eyebrow. No? No, because... Mason took a breath. Because Caleb's way is different from your book. The book is wrong. Wrong how? The arrows. And the colors. And... Mason climbed down from the chair and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. Someone handed him a marker. And then, without hesitation, he started drawing. What emerged was remarkable. A complex visual system for representing gravitational forces, with color-coded arrows, proportional sizing, and directional indicators that made the abstract concrete. It was sophisticated and intuitive and nothing like the rigid diagrams in Lang's book. Mason finished and turned around. See? Caleb taught me to make it move in my head. Your book just has pictures that sit there. They don't do anything. Lang stared at the board, and for the first time his composure cracked. Just for a second, a flash of anger, of recognition, of something that looked almost like fear. Because he was looking at his own stolen research, refined by the person who'd actually understood it. That's... Lang stopped. Started again. That's very creative, Mason. But creativity isn't the same as accuracy. I'm sure Caleb told you this was the right way, but it is the right way, Mason said, and there was no doubt in his voice anymore. I know because it works. I can solve any problem using this. Watch. And before anyone could stop him, he started writing out a physics equation, calculating the gravitational pull between two objects using his visual system to work through the math. The panel members leaned forward, watching. Mason finished and stepped back. See? It's right. I checked it 3 times. One of the outside experts, a physicist from MIT, pulled out her phone and ran the calculation. Her eyebrows went up. He's correct, she said quietly. The room erupted again, but this time it was different. The panel members were whispering among themselves, looking at Mason's drawing, comparing it to Lang's published diagrams. Harmon banged her gavel. We'll take a 30-minute recess to deliberate. Adrienne scooped up Mason and carried him out of the room. In the hallway, she set him down and hugged him so hard he squeaked. You were amazing, she said. Did I do good? You did perfect. Caleb was waiting by the window, his face unreadable. When he saw them, something in his expression shattered. He knelt down and pulled Mason into a hug. Thank you, he whispered. Mason hugged him back. I just told them the truth, like you taught me. I know, buddy, I know. The 30 minutes felt like hours. Adrienne paced the hallway while Caleb sat with both boys, Mason and Noah, who'd been brought in after the hearing ended. They were playing some game on Noah's phone, their heads bent together, oblivious to the weight of what was happening inside that room. Finally, the door opened. Harmon stood in the doorway. We're ready. They filed back in. Lang looked calm, but Adrienne could see the tension in his shoulders. His lawyers were whispering urgently to each other. Harmon waited until everyone was seated. Then she said, This panel has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. We've examined the metadata analysis, the witness testimony, and the comparative research documentation. We've also considered the demonstration provided by Mason Vale. She paused, and Adrienne felt her heart hammering. The evidence shows a clear pattern of intellectual property theft, Harmon said. Dr. Lang's published work contains methodologies, visual models, and pedagogical frameworks that appear first in Mr. Hart's research files, with timestamps that predate Dr. Lang's publications by months or years. While Dr. Lang has claimed these similarities result from collaborative work, we find no documentation supporting that claim. No co-authorship agreements, no acknowledgement of contribution, no evidence of the kind of transparent collaboration that characterizes legitimate academic partnerships. Lang's face had gone pale. Furthermore, Harmon continued, the testimony from Mason Vale demonstrates that Mr. Hart's original methodology produces measurable educational outcomes that align with his research claims. The fact that a 7-year-old child can master advanced concepts using these techniques suggests their validity and effectiveness. She looked directly at Lang. It is this panel's finding that Dr. Victor Lang committed research misconduct by appropriating Mr. Hart's intellectual property and publishing it as his own work. We recommend immediate suspension of Dr. Lang's position, revocation of his tenure, and a formal investigation into all of his published research to determine the full extent of the plagiarism. The room exploded. Lang was on his feet, his lawyers shouting objections. Harmon was banging her gavel, calling for order, and Adrienne just sat there, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. It wasn't over. She knew that. Lang would appeal, would fight, would use every resource he had to overturn this decision. But they'd won the first battle, and sometimes that was enough. In the hallway afterward, Caleb stood very still, like he was afraid to move. Like if he moved, the moment would shatter and he'd wake up to find it had all been a dream. We did it, Adrienne said quietly. We did it, he repeated, like he was testing the words. Then he started crying. Not quiet tears, big, ugly, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. Adrienne pulled him into a hug and held on while he fell apart. I didn't think... His voice was muffled against her shoulder. I stopped believing we could actually win. I know, but we did. We did. Mason and Noah appeared beside them, looking worried. Noah tugged on Caleb's sleeve. Dad, are you okay? Caleb pulled back and wiped his face, laughing through the tears. Yeah, buddy, I'm okay. We won. Do you understand what that means? Noah's eyes went wide. Really? Really? So we don't have to hide anymore? Caleb's face crumpled again. No, we don't have to hide anymore. Noah threw his arms around his father and Mason joined the hug, and for a moment they were just a tangle of people who'd survived something terrible together. Adrienne stepped back, giving them space. Her phone was already ringing, reporters, lawyers, board members who'd seen the news. But for once, she ignored it. She just watched her son laugh with his friend, watched Caleb hold his boy like he was the most precious thing in the world, and let herself feel the victory. They'd won. But as she'd learn in the days to come, winning the hearing was just the beginning. Lang wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. The backlash hit within hours. Adrienne was in her car heading home when her phone started blowing up. Texts, emails, notifications cascading faster than she could read them. She pulled over and opened Twitter, and her stomach dropped. Victor Lang had posted a video. He was sitting in what looked like a home office, bookshelves behind him, his face drawn with emotion. The caption read, "When institutions fail, we must speak truth." Adrienne hit play. "I want to talk directly to the educators who've trusted me," Lang said, his voice breaking slightly. "Today, the University of Oregon made a decision based on incomplete evidence and outside pressure. They've recommended my suspension, accused me of plagiarism, destroyed decades of work because a billionaire decided she didn't like me." He paused, letting that sink in. Adrienne Vale is a powerful woman. She has resources most of us can't imagine. And when her son struggled in school, instead of accepting that learning is hard, that children develop at different rates, that sometimes there are no villains, she decided to create one. She chose me. The camera moves slightly closer. "The methodology I developed has helped thousands of children. Teachers across this country have used my frameworks to reach students who were falling through the cracks. And now, because one wealthy parent wanted someone to blame, all of that is being called into question. My reputation, my career, my life's work, gone. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I couldn't fight back against unlimited money and institutional intimidation." Adrienne felt rage building in her chest. "So I'm asking you," Lang continued, speaking directly to the camera now, "don't let this happen. Don't let corporate power dictate what's true in education. Don't let a vindictive billionaire destroy the work we've built together. Stand with me. Demand a fair investigation. Show the University of Oregon that academic integrity matters more than wealth and influence." The video ended. It had been posted 20 minutes ago. It already had 50,000 views. By the time Adrienne got home, it had 200,000. By morning, it had gone viral. The narrative shifted overnight. Suddenly, Adrienne wasn't a mother protecting her child. She was a bully using her money to destroy an innocent educator. Op-eds appeared in major publications questioning whether the hearing had been fair, whether the panel had been pressured, whether a billionaire CEO should have that much power over academic institutions. Parents who'd used Lang's methods flooded social media with testimonials about how his work had changed their children's lives. Teachers posted tearful videos defending him. A petition demanding the university reverse its decision gathered 100,000 signatures in 48 hours. And through it all, Lang played the victim perfectly. Hurt, but dignified. Wounded, but still fighting for his students. A brilliant educator brought down by wealth and spite. Adrienne watched it happen with a kind of grim fascination. She'd underestimated him. She'd thought winning the hearing would be enough. That truth would speak for itself. She'd forgotten that narratives were more powerful than facts. Her board called an emergency meeting. 3 more clients pulled their contracts. Protesters returned to the Vale Tower, but this time they were louder, angrier, more organized. Someone threw a brick through one of the ground floor windows. And then Mason's school called. "Ms. Vale, I'm afraid we need to discuss Mason's enrollment," Principal Morrison said, her voice tight. Adrienne felt her blood go cold. "What about it?" Several parents have expressed concerns about the current situation. They're worried about the media attention, the protesters, the atmosphere it's creating. And frankly, I'm worried about Mason's safety. "Are you expelling him?" "No, of course not, but I think it might be best if he took some time off. Until things calm down." "You mean until I stop making you look bad?" Morrison sighed. "Ms. Vale, please understand. This isn't personal, but we have to think about all of our students. And right now, having Mason here is creating a distraction." Adrienne wanted to scream, wanted to threaten, to sue, to burn the whole school down. Instead, she said, "I'll pick him up this afternoon." She hung up and sat in her office, staring at nothing. They'd won the hearing, but they were losing the war. That night, she found Caleb in the guest house he'd been staying in with Noah. He was packing. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Leaving." He didn't look at her. "This was a mistake, all of it." "We won, Caleb." "Did we?" "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like we just made everything worse." He shoved a shirt into his duffel bag. "Lang is more famous than ever. You're being crucified in the media. Our kids can't even go to school. What exactly did we win?" "The truth. The truth doesn't pay my rent. It doesn't keep Noah safe. It doesn't—" He stopped, his shoulders slumping. "I can't do this anymore, Adrian. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being afraid. I just want to take my son and disappear somewhere Lang will never find us." "So you're running again." "I'm surviving. There's a difference." Adrian felt something crack inside her. "You want to know what I learned when James died? That running doesn't work. That you can hide from pain, from responsibility, from everything that scares you, but it follows you anyway. The only difference is whether you face it standing up or on your knees." Caleb finally looked at her. "Easy for you to say. You've never had to choose between your principles and your kid. You think I haven't? You think every day I don't wake up wondering if fighting Lang is the right choice, or just my ego refusing to back down? You think I don't see Mason's face when he asks why people hate us?" Her voice broke. "I'm terrified, Caleb, every single day, but I'm more terrified of teaching my son that bullies win if you just let them." "That's not—" "It is. You're teaching Noah that when things get hard, you run, that the truth doesn't matter if the cost is too high, that people like Lang get to destroy whoever they want because fighting back is too painful." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair, but we're in it now, and if we quit, every sacrifice we made, every sleepless night, every attack, every moment, our kids were scared, it all means nothing." "Maybe it already means nothing." The words hung in the air between them. Adrienne walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. "When Mason testified at that hearing, do you know what I saw? I saw a kid who knew he was brilliant, who wasn't ashamed or confused or broken, who stood in front of a room full of adults and proved that he mattered." She turned back to Caleb. "That's what we won, not the hearing, not the panel's decision. We won the moment Mason stopped believing the lies people told about him. And if we quit now, we're telling him that moment didn't count, that he should have stayed small and quiet because being brave is too expensive." Caleb stared at her, his face working through emotions she couldn't read. "I can't lose my son," he said finally. "Then don't. Stay and fight with me. Finish what we started." "What if we lose?" "Then at least we'll know we tried." He looked at the half-packed duffel bag, then back at her. "One more week," he said quietly. "If things don't change in 1 week, I'm taking Noah and we're gone. Deal?" "Deal." The next morning, Adrienne called an emergency press conference. Her PR team had advised against it, said she should stay quiet, let the controversy die down, wait for the next news cycle to bury Lang's narrative. But Adrienne was done playing defense. She stood behind a podium in the Vail Tower lobby, cameras pointed at her from every angle, and told the truth. 3 months ago, I hired a housekeeper named Caleb Hart. I didn't know his story. I didn't know he'd been a researcher whose work had been stolen. I didn't know he'd spent 6 years hiding because speaking up had cost him everything. She paused, letting the cameras catch her expression. I just knew that for the first time since my husband died, my son was happy, that the man everyone said was broken had found a way to reach the child everyone said couldn't learn. And when I discovered why Caleb was hiding, when I learned what Victor Lang had done to him, I made a choice. Her voice hardened. I chose to fight, not because I'm vindictive, not because I'm a bully, but because I have resources most people don't, and I refuse to watch a man who helps children get destroyed while the man who stole from him gets standing ovations. Someone shouted a question, but Adrienne kept talking. Dr. Lang wants you to believe this is about power, about a wealthy woman throwing her weight around, but it's not. It's about a system that protects the wrong people, that rewards theft and punishes honesty, that tells kids like my son they're broken when really it's the system that's broken. She pulled out a folder and held it up. This contains documentation of every paper Lang has published in the last 8 years. Every methodology, every framework, every so-called innovation. And do you know what we found? That 70% of his published work originates from Caleb Hart's research files. 70%. That's not collaboration, that's theft. The room erupted with questions, but Adrienne wasn't done. Lang says I'm trying to destroy him. He's wrong. I'm trying to expose him. There's a difference. And if telling the truth about academic fraud makes me a bully, then I'll be a bully. Because someone has to be willing to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. She stepped away from the podium. The press conference exploded into chaos, but Adrienne didn't stay to answer questions. She'd said what needed saying. Now it was up to the world to decide what to do with it. The response was immediate and divided. Half the internet called her a hero, a woman using her privilege to fight corruption. The other half called her a tyrant, a billionaire who thought money meant she could rewrite reality. But something had shifted. Journalists started digging into Lang's background, looking for cracks in his story. Academic blogs began publishing analyses of his work, questioning whether his methodologies were as original as he claimed. Teachers who'd been silent started speaking up, sharing stories about Lang's arrogance, his tendency to take credit for collaborative work, his habit of pushing out anyone who questioned him. The narrative was changing, and then 5 days after Adrienne's press conference, the breakthrough came. It started with an email from a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen. She'd been a graduate student in Lang's department 10 years earlier, and she'd seen Adrienne's press conference. What she had to say changed everything. Adrienne read the email 3 times before calling her lawyers. "We need to meet with her," she said. "Today." Dr. Chen was nervous when she arrived at Adrienne's office. A small woman in her late 30s wearing a cardigan and clutching a worn messenger bag like a shield. "Thank you for seeing me," she said as she sat down. "Thank you for reaching out." Adrienne gestured to Caleb, who'd come for the meeting. "This is Caleb Hart." Chen's eyes widened. "I know, I worked with you, briefly, in 2016. Caleb frowned. "I don't remember." "You wouldn't. I was just a grad student. You were focused on your research." She opened her bag and pulled out a laptop. "But I remember you. And I remember what happened." She opened a file and turned the screen toward them. "Dr. Lang didn't just steal from you," she said quietly. "He's been doing it for years. To me, to other researchers, to anyone whose work he could claim. I have emails, dated files, documentation of him pressuring me to sign over my research to his lab. When I refused, he destroyed my career just like he destroyed yours." Adrienne leaned forward. "Why didn't you speak up before?" "Because I was terrified. Because he's powerful, and I'm nobody. Because—" Chen's voice broke. "Because I watched what happened to Caleb, and I knew I couldn't survive it." "But you're speaking up now." "Because you proved it's possible to fight back. Because—" She looked at Caleb. "Because you deserved better. We all did." Over the next hour, Chen walked them through her evidence. Emails where Lang explicitly demanded ownership of her research. File timestamps showing he'd copied her work and published it under his name. Testimony from other graduate students who'd experienced the same thing. It was a pattern. Lang hadn't just stolen from Caleb. He'd built his entire career on exploiting people who were too vulnerable to fight back. By the time Chen finished, Adrienne was already planning the next move. "We're going public with this," she said. "All of it. Every victim, every piece of evidence, every lie Lang has told." Chen looked terrified. "He'll come after me." "Let him try. This time he's not fighting one person. He's fighting all of us." The story broke 3 days later. The New York Times published a comprehensive investigation. A pattern of theft. How Victor Lang built his career on stolen research. It detailed Chen's story, Caleb's story, and 3 other researchers who'd come forward after seeing Adrienne's press conference. The evidence was overwhelming. Decades of systematic plagiarism, academic fraud, and institutional cover-up. Lang tried to fight back, but the ground had shifted beneath him. His publisher dropped him. The Netflix documentary was canceled. School districts started pulling his consulting contracts. And then the University of Oregon announced a full audit of his published work. Within a week, they'd found fraud in nearly every paper he'd published. Within 2 weeks, his tenure was formally revoked. Within 3, he'd resigned and disappeared from public life. It was over. Not cleanly, not easily, but definitively. Lang's career was destroyed. His reputation was in ruins. And Caleb's name was being restored, one academic institution at a time. Adrienne stood in her office watching the news coverage, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Caleb appeared in the doorway. "We did it. We did it," she agreed. He walked over and stood beside her, both of them looking out at the city below. "What happens now?" "Now?" Adrienne smiled. "Now we build something better." 2 months later, they were standing in a converted warehouse in Portland, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on what would become the Hartvale Learning Center. It was Caleb's dream, funded by Adrienne's resources. A place where kids like Mason and Noah could learn using methods that actually worked, where visual spatial learners weren't labeled as broken, where being different was celebrated instead of punished. Mason and Noah raced around the space, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. They'd become inseparable over the past months, two kids who understood what it meant to be told you weren't enough, who'd found friendship in shared difference. "They're going to destroy this place," Caleb said, watching them with a smile. "Good. That's what it's for." Adrienne turned to him. "How are you feeling about the school opening?" "Terrified, excited, both." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "I keep thinking about all the kids who could have been helped if I'd fought back 6 years ago. All the time we lost." "You can't think like that." "Why not?" "Because you did what you had to do to survive, to protect Noah. That's not weakness, it's love." She touched his arm. "And now you're here, building something that's going to help thousands of kids. That matters more than the time you lost." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have. You just didn't believe it yet." "No, I mean it. He stopped, searching for words. "You saw me when I was invisible. You fought for me when I'd given up on fighting for myself. You risked everything because you believed I mattered. Nobody's ever done that for me before." Adrienne felt her throat tighten. "You did the same for Mason. You saw him when everyone else had given up. You gave him back his brilliance. So we're even?" "I don't think that's how it works." They stood there, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and something shifted between them. Something that had been building for months, through late-night strategy sessions and shared fear and the intimacy of fighting a war together. Caleb reached out and took her hand. "Adrienne," he said quietly. "Dad," Noah's voice echoed across the space. "Mason says we can paint our classroom any color we want. Is that true?" Caleb laughed and pulled back. "We'll talk about it." "That's a no," Mason said knowingly. "That's a we'll see," Adrienne corrected. "Which is different." The boys ran off again, and the moment passed. But later, after the kids were asleep and the construction crews had left, Adrienne found Caleb sitting on the front steps of the building, looking up at the stars. She sat down beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how different my life is now compared to a year ago. How—" He laughed softly. "How impossible all of this would have seemed. Good impossible or bad impossible?" "Good. Definitely good." He looked at her. "I think I'm happy. Is that allowed? After everything we've been through, I'd say you've earned it." Caleb smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Then he said very carefully, "What about you? Are you happy?" Adrienne thought about it. About Mason laughing with Noah, about the learning center they were building, about the life she'd somehow built from the wreckage of the past 2 years. "Getting there," she said. "Just getting there. It's been a long road. But yeah, I think I'm getting there." Caleb reached out and took her hand again, and this time she didn't let go. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just being. Two people who'd fought their way through hell and somehow found each other on the other side. And for the first time in years, Adrienne let herself imagine a future that wasn't about survival or fighting or protecting what she had left. A future that was about building something new with someone who understood what it cost to get there. The Hartvale Learning Center opened 3 months later to a waiting list of 200 families. Mason was one of the first students enrolled. So was Noah. They shared a classroom painted bright blue, Noah's choice, with color-coded visual systems covering every wall. The methodology worked exactly as Caleb had always known it would. Kids who'd been labeled learning disabled were suddenly thriving. Parents who'd been told to lower their expectations watched their children master complex concepts with joy instead of frustration. And slowly, carefully, Caleb's name began to spread, not as a cautionary tale about academic fraud, but as a pioneer who developed something genuinely revolutionary. Universities started reaching out, asking him to present his research. School districts wanted to implement his methods. Publishers offered him book deals. He turned down most of it. The speaking engagements, the consulting contracts, the chance to reclaim the academic career he'd lost. He'd learned the hard way that fame was a trap, that institutional power corrupted more than it enlightened. Instead, he focused on what mattered: teaching kids, training teachers, building a model that could be replicated without being commodified. And somewhere along the way, he and Adrian stopped pretending that what they had was just partnership. It happened gradually, then all at once. Dinners that turned into long conversations, working sessions that ended with them falling asleep on her couch, moments when she'd catch him looking at her with an expression that made her heart race. The first time he kissed her, they were alone in the learning center after hours. She'd said something that made him laugh, and then suddenly he was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said, "if that's okay." "More than okay," she whispered. And he did. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about their relationship was perfect. They fought about parenting styles and business decisions, and whether to expand the learning center or keep it small. Caleb struggled with trust after years of betrayal. Adrienne struggled with control after years of needing to manage everything herself. But they worked at it. They showed up for each other. They built something real out of shared damage and stubborn hope. 6 months after the learning center opened, Caleb moved into Adrienne's house with Noah. Not because it was practical or convenient, but because it felt right. Mason and Noah became brothers in everything but name, sharing a room by choice, finishing each other's sentences, defending each other with the fierce loyalty of kids who'd survived something hard together. And Adrienne learned what it meant to have a family again. Not the perfect, glossy version she'd tried to maintain after James died, but the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of people who chose each other every day. 1 year after the hearing, Adrienne stood on a stage in front of 500 educators and told Caleb's story. It was the annual Education Technology Conference, the same one Victor Lang had been scheduled to keynote before his career imploded. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "We spend a lot of time in education talking about innovation," Adrienne said, "about disrupting old models and finding new solutions. But the truth is, most innovation isn't new. It's just finally giving credit to the people who've been doing the work all along." She gestured to where Caleb sat in the front row, Mason and Noah on either side of him. Caleb Hart developed a methodology that's changing how we teach neurodivergent learners, but that methodology didn't come from a lab or a grant-funded study. It came from a father trying to help his son, from someone who refused to accept that different meant broken. Her voice softened. The system tried to silence him, tried to steal his work and erase his name, but he survived. And now, because he survived, thousands of kids are learning that they're not less than, just different than, that their brains are brilliant in ways the world is finally starting to recognize. She paused, looking out at the crowd. "I'm not an educator. I'm a CEO who got lucky enough to hire the right housekeeper at the right time. But what I've learned is this. Real change doesn't come from institutions or policies or top-down mandates. It comes from people who see a problem and refuse to look away, who fight even when fighting costs everything, who believe that truth matters more than comfort." She looked at Caleb again, and he smiled. "Caleb taught my son that he was brilliant, but more than that, he taught me that courage looks like showing up when you're terrified, like building something new from the ashes of what you lost, like refusing to let the people who hurt you define who you become." The room was silent. "So thank you," Adrienne said. "To every teacher who's ever fought for a kid the system wanted to give up on. To every parent who's refused to accept that their child is broken. To everyone who's chosen truth over comfort, even when it cost them everything." She stepped away from the podium to a standing ovation, but the moment that mattered most came later in the quiet of their hotel room when Caleb pulled her close and said, "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for letting me," she whispered back. 2 years after Mason laughed in James's study, Adrienne stood in that same room and looked at the photographs on the walls. James, young and smiling. James at their wedding. James holding baby Mason for the first time. She'd avoided this room for so long, too painful, too full of memories that felt like accusation. But standing here now, she didn't feel guilt. She felt gratitude for the life they'd built together, for the son he'd given her, for the foundation that had allowed her to survive his loss and build something new. "I hope you'd be proud of him," she said to the photograph, "of who he's becoming." "Mom?" Mason appeared in the doorway. He was 9 now, taller and more confident, his eyes bright with the kind of intelligence that wasn't afraid of itself anymore. "Hey kiddo, what's up? Caleb says dinner's ready, and Noah wants to know if we can watch Star Wars after." "Again?" "It's research," Mason said seriously. "We're analyzing the physics of lightsabers." Adrienne laughed. "Of course you are." She followed him downstairs to the kitchen, where Caleb was pulling a casserole out of the oven and Noah was setting the table. The scene was so domestic, so ordinary, so impossibly perfect in its imperfection. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, but the one she'd fought for. Built from wreckage and stubbornness, and the kind of love that chose to show up even when showing up was terrifying. They ate dinner together, all 4 of them, talking over each other and laughing at bad jokes and arguing about whether lightsabers could actually exist. And when the boys disappeared upstairs to watch their movie, Adrienne and Caleb cleaned the kitchen in comfortable silence. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her expression. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how none of this was supposed to happen. How—" She stopped, searching for words. "How I spent 2 years trying to control everything, to keep Mason safe by managing every variable. And the moment I let go, the moment I let a stranger into my house and my life, everything changed." Caleb dried his hands and turned to face her. "Regret it?" "Not even a little." He kissed her, slow and gentle, and she leaned into it. "I love you," he said against her lips. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Adrienne pulled back to look at him. "I love you too." "Even though I'm a mess?" "Because you're a mess, just like me." She smiled. "We're a matched set." He laughed and pulled her close again. And upstairs she could hear Mason and Noah arguing about whether X-Wings or TIE fighters were faster, their voices bright with the kind of certainty that came from knowing they belonged somewhere. This was what winning looked like, Adrienne thought. Not perfect, not easy, but real. They'd fought Victor Lang and won. They'd built a learning center that was changing lives. They'd created a family out of damage and hope. But more than any of that, they'd proven something that mattered. That the truth doesn't always win because it's true. It wins because people choose to fight for it. Because someone decides that protecting what's right matters more than protecting themselves. That being broken isn't the same as being weak. That different doesn't mean less. And that sometimes the person you hire to clean your floors ends up teaching you how to see. 3 years after that first night when Adrienne heard her son laughing, she stood on a stage at a TED conference and told a different kind of story. Not about victory or vindication or defeating enemies, about being wrong. "I spent most of my life believing that success meant control," she said. "That if I was smart enough, strategic enough, powerful enough, I could manage every outcome. And then my husband died, and my son stopped talking, and I realized that control was an illusion I'd been selling myself." She paused, letting the audience sit with that. "The moment that changed everything wasn't when I won a legal battle or exposed a fraud or built a successful company. It was when I admitted I didn't know how to help my child, when I stopped pretending I had all the answers and let someone else in." She looked out at the crowd. "We live in a world that worships certainty, that rewards confidence and punishes doubt, that tells us vulnerability is weakness and asking for help is failure. But the truth is, every meaningful change in my life came from admitting I was wrong, from letting go of what I thought I knew and being brave enough to learn something new." Her voice softened. "My son taught me that. Not because he was exceptional or special or uniquely brilliant, but because he refused to pretend he was something he wasn't. He was struggling, and instead of hiding it, he let someone see, and that honesty saved both of us." She smiled, thinking about Mason at home with Caleb and Noah, probably arguing about some physics concept she didn't understand. So here's what I want to leave you with. Being strong doesn't mean having all the answers. It means being brave enough to say, "I don't know," to ask for help, to admit when the system is broken instead of blaming yourself for not fitting into it. She took a breath. And if you're someone who's been told you're not enough, that you're too slow, too different, too broken to matter, Know this, you're not the problem. The people who told you that, they're the ones who are wrong. And somewhere out there, there's someone who's going to see you the way you deserve to be seen. Who's going to fight for you the way I fought for Caleb, the way he fought for our sons. Her voice cracked just slightly. You just have to be brave enough to let them. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes, but the moment Adrienne remembered most came later when she got home and found a note on the kitchen counter in Mason's handwriting. Mom, Noah and I proved that lightsabers are thermodynamically impossible, but we designed a better version using plasma containment. Caleb says we're geniuses. Love you. She smiled and tucked the note into her pocket. This was what victory looked like. Not headlines or awards or public vindication. Just a kid who knew he was brilliant, writing a note to his mom about imaginary weapons, completely unaware of how much he'd changed the world by simply being himself. And that, Adrienne thought, was worth every fight, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and fear and stubborn, relentless hope. Because in the end, they hadn't just defeated Victor Lang. They'd built something bigger than revenge or justice or proving who was right. They'd built a place where different meant brilliant, where broken meant human, where a housekeeper could be a genius and a CEO could be wrong, and 2 broken families could become whole. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point all along. Not to win, but to keep showing up for the people who mattered, even when showing up cost everything. To fight for truth, not because it was easy, but because it was right. And to believe, despite all evidence to the contrary, that love and courage and stubborn refusal to accept injustice could actually change the world. One child at a time, one family at a time, one moment of impossible laughter at a time.